The conference room was unusually silent, the air thick with anticipation. Jessica sat at the long, polished table, her fingers nervously drumming against the surface. She could feel the eyes of her co-workers on her, but none of them spoke. Instead, there was only the uncomfortable shuffle of papers and the occasional glance at the clock. It was a meeting like any other, yet it felt like everything was about to change. Her boss, Karen, a woman with a sharp look and a no-nonsense attitude, stood at the head of the table, her arms crossed as she stared Jessica down. "I think we need to address something, Jessica," Karen said, her voice calm but laced with an underlying tension. "You've stirred up quite a bit of controversy with your recent comments about Elon Musk." Jessica felt her stomach drop. This was it, the moment she had been dreading. She had known the risks when she defended Musk in the team discussion the other day. She knew her stance wasn't popular, far from it, but she had never imagined it would lead to this. "I don't think it's fair to judge someone based on their personal opinions, Karen," Jessica replied, trying to maintain composure. "Especially when those opinions are about innovation and pushing boundaries. Musk has done more for the tech world than most of us can even comprehend." Karen's eyes narrowed. "It's not just about Musk, Jessica. It's about your ability to maintain a professional atmosphere here. Your comments have caused division in the team. People are uncomfortable." Jessica tried not to flinch. She had expected this. She had expected it to get ugly. But it still stung, hearing her dedication to standing up for free speech framed as a problem. "Look, I understand it's not the most popular opinion," Jessica continued, her voice steady but her hands shaking slightly. "But shouldn't we be allowed to express our views, especially in a place that values diversity of thought? This isn't just about Musk. It's about the freedom to speak our minds." Karen leaned forward, her expression cold. "Your personal opinions have no place here, Jessica. Not when they disrupt the harmony of this workplace. You were hired to do a job, not to stir the pot. We need to think about the bigger picture." Jessica's heart raced. It was happening. The subtle threat was there, unspoken but clear. She was being put on the defensive. "Do you realize how many people are talking behind your back about this? How many are uncomfortable with the way you've turned this into a political issue?" Karen's voice hardened. "I'm afraid your position here might not be tenable anymore." A cold chill ran through Jessica. Her mind raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. She couldn't back down now, not when everything she stood for was on the line. Before she could respond, Karen held up a hand, signaling the end of the conversation. "We'll discuss this further tomorrow. But understand this, your behavior is becoming a liability." Jessica nodded, her mind spinning. She wasn't just losing her position in the company. She was losing the one thing that had kept her grounded for so long. Her ability to speak her truth. The one thing she could always count on. Her voice was now at risk of being silenced. As she left the meeting room, Jessica's stomach churned. She walked down the hallway, trying to shake the feeling of dread that had settled in her chest. She wasn't sure what was worse, the possibility of losing her job or the realization that standing up for what she believed in might cost her everything. Jessica sat at her kitchen table, staring at the phone in her hands. The screen was filled with messages from her family, friends, and even a few people from work, all offering their sympathy after the meeting with Karen. But Jessica wasn't ready to respond. Instead, her thoughts drifted back to a time before all this, before the controversy, before the firing, even before the tension in the office. It had been a simpler time, one where her biggest worry had been juggling her son's school schedule and the late-night hours she worked as a marketing coordinator. Her son, Jake, was the light of her life. Only 12 years old, he was already showing signs of brilliance, with his fascination for computers and space. Jessica smiled as she thought about the countless nights they spent together, building rockets out of cardboard and discussing the latest space missions. She loved those moments. They were the only time she truly felt at peace. When Jake was born, Jessica was fresh out of college, and her world had been turned upside down. A single mom at 22, with no family support and barely enough money to make ends meet, she had spent the first few years of Jake's life battling for stability. There had been nights when she went without dinner just to make sure Jake had everything he needed. But she had always believed that things would get better. They had to. She had started at her current job almost 5 years ago, working as an entry-level marketing assistant. It hadn't been glamorous, but it paid the bills. Over time, she had worked her way up, proving herself through late nights, hard work, and an unyielding drive to succeed. She never expected the corporate world to be easy, but she hadn't expected it to be a place where her principles could be her downfall either. As she stirred her coffee absent-mindedly, Jessica thought about the day she first defended Elon Musk in the office. It had seemed like a casual discussion at the time, but it had escalated quickly when someone, she couldn't remember who, had criticized Musk's role in tech. "I just don't get why we're still giving him credit for what's going on at Tesla and SpaceX," one of her co-workers had said, clearly annoyed. "He's just a billionaire who's out of touch with real problems." It was in that moment that Jessica's instinct to defend the underdog took over. "You're wrong," she had said. "Musk may be a billionaire, but his work has changed entire industries. People are still questioning the validity of electric cars, yet Tesla continues to break records. SpaceX is doing things that were once considered impossible. That's not just luck." Her voice had been calm, but firm. Jessica knew what it was like to be misunderstood, to be judged based on things people didn't truly understand. Musk, despite his flaws, was a visionary, someone who pushed the boundaries of what was possible, just like she had to do every day in her life. The conversation had died quickly after that, but it wasn't over. Jessica had no idea that her words would spark such a backlash. She had no idea that her defense of someone like Musk, who was often a divisive figure, would make her a target for the kind of scrutiny that she never wanted to face. But it wasn't just about Musk. It was about her, Jessica the single mom, fighting for her place in a world that often overlooked people like her. She had worked so hard to build a reputation for herself, and now, it was all at risk because of her beliefs. It didn't seem fair, but life rarely was. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice from the other room. "Mom," Jake called out. "Yeah, buddy," she replied, smiling at the thought of him. "I made you something." Jake appeared in the doorway, holding a small cardboard rocket ship. It was clunky and a little crooked, but it was made with the care only a child's hands could provide. His eyes sparkled with pride as he handed it to her. Jessica took the rocket, her heart swelling with warmth. "This is amazing, Jake. I love it." Jake grinned, pleased with the compliment. "I thought maybe you'd need some space stuff today." She chuckled, grateful for his sweetness. "You're right. It's been a tough day, but this helps." As Jake sat beside her at the table, Jessica realized something. No matter what happened at work, no matter what sacrifices she had to make, she would never stop fighting for him. He was her motivation, her purpose, her everything. And if standing up for what she believed in meant losing everything else, so be it. She would find a way to make it work, just like she always had. The days following the meeting with Karen were the hardest Jessica had faced in a long time. It wasn't just the cold stares she received from her colleagues, or the whispered conversations in the break room. It was the way everything in the office seemed to shift. The once friendly, collaborative environment now felt charged with an undercurrent of judgment and suspicion. Jessica could feel the eyes on her every time she walked through the halls. At first, it was subtle, people avoiding eye contact, quickly turning away when she walked past. But soon, the whispers grew louder. "I can't believe she said that about Musk," one coworker muttered just loud enough for Jessica to hear as she passed the HR department. "I heard she's always had some weird ideas," another one commented, and Jessica's heart sank. She wasn't used to this kind of treatment. She had always been the person who made people laugh, the one who was quick to offer help, and the one everyone could count on for a well-thought-out opinion during meetings. She had earned her place here, but now she felt like an outsider, someone whose very presence was a disruption. The hardest part was the silence from her closest coworkers. Those who had once been her friends were now avoiding her. Susan, her old lunch buddy, barely acknowledged her anymore. They used to talk about everything: work, family, the latest news. But now, Susan seemed to go out of her way to keep her distance. At lunch on Thursday, Jessica sat alone at a table in the corner, her salad untouched. She tried to drown out the conversations happening around her, but it was impossible. Everywhere she turned, the topic of Musk lingered. No one seemed to care that Jessica had merely defended his business decisions. All they saw was a woman who had stirred the pot, someone who had the audacity to challenge the status quo. By Friday afternoon, the tension had reached a breaking point. Karen called Jessica into her office again. This time, she wasn't alone. The HR manager, Bob, was seated at the desk, his stern face giving away nothing. "Jessica," Karen started, her voice steady but firm, "this isn't easy, but we need to talk about your behavior." Jessica's stomach twisted. She had known this moment was coming, but it still felt like a punch to the gut. "What do you mean, exactly?" she asked, keeping her voice calm even as her heart raced. Bob leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "We've received multiple complaints about your behavior in the office. Some team members are uncomfortable with your recent comments. They feel that it's causing tension and disrupting the work environment." Jessica's hands clenched into fists at her sides, but she forced herself to remain calm. "All I did was share my opinion. I didn't mean to upset anyone." Karen's expression hardened. "It's not just about your opinion, Jessica. It's about your ability to work with the team. When you share personal views that are as controversial as the ones you expressed, it can create division. We need to think about the company's culture and its values." Jessica's mind spun. She had never felt more isolated. She had always been someone who believed that a difference of opinion could be a healthy part of any workplace. But this felt like a direct attack on her character. "I've always worked hard to be part of this team," Jessica said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've put in the hours. I've helped when asked, and I've contributed to every project. I've always been about collaboration." "And that's appreciated," Karen said, but there was no warmth in her tone. "But we're at a point now where we need to consider the bigger picture. Your opinions on Musk are not aligned with the direction we want this company to take." Jessica's chest tightened. She had defended someone who was pushing boundaries and changing the world, and now it felt like she was being punished for it. "I'm sorry," Jessica said, her voice low, "but I can't apologize for standing up for what I believe in." Bob cleared his throat. "We'll give you some time to think about your position here. But just so you understand, the company may have to make some difficult decisions soon if things don't improve." As Jessica left the office, her mind raced. What was she supposed to do now? She had never backed down from a fight in her life, but this was different. She had a son to take care of, bills to pay, and a reputation she had worked years to build. Yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that standing up for Musk wasn't just about him. It was about her right to have a voice, her right to stand firm in her beliefs. Was it worth it? Was her career worth sacrificing just to hold onto her integrity? Later that night, as Jessica tucked Jake into bed, she looked at him and smiled. He had no idea what she was going through at work, and she didn't want to worry him. She leaned in and kissed him on the forehead. "You're my reason for everything," she whispered to herself. "No matter what happens, I'll always stand for what's right." The weekend passed in a blur of emotions for Jessica. She couldn't stop thinking about the conversation with Karen and Bob. It was as if a heavy fog had settled in her mind, clouding her every thought. What was she supposed to do now? Her heart ached at the thought of losing her job, her career, but at the same time, she couldn't shake the feeling that backing down would betray everything she stood for. It was Sunday evening when her phone buzzed with a new email notification. She had been avoiding checking her work inbox, unsure of what she might find, but something told her to look this time. The subject line read, "Urgent, company-wide announcement." Her fingers hovered over the screen, hesitation creeping in. She took a deep breath before opening it. "Dear team, after careful consideration and in light of recent events, we are issuing a company-wide statement to clarify our position on workplace discourse and the importance of fostering an environment where all employees feel respected and valued. As always, we encourage diverse opinions and perspectives, but we also want to ensure that everyone can contribute to the team's success without causing division or discomfort. Starting Monday, we will be implementing new guidelines for team discussions. We ask that all employees refrain from bringing up politically sensitive topics during work hours to ensure a positive and collaborative atmosphere. Additionally, there will be a mandatory team-building seminar this Friday to address communication strategies and ensure alignment with company values. Thank you for your understanding and cooperation. Best, Karen Lawson, CEO. The email hit Jessica like a punch to the gut. It was clear the company was taking a firm stance. No more controversial discussions, no more debates about the values they held. And worst of all, it felt like the company was holding her personally responsible for the shift in atmosphere. She didn't know what to think. Was this a warning? A veiled threat? Or perhaps the company's attempt to restore order and avoid any further conflict? Either way, it didn't sit right with her. Jessica had always believed that good companies thrived on the free exchange of ideas, even when they were uncomfortable. But now, everything felt different. The corporate world had always seemed a bit cold, but this was colder. The stakes had risen, and the pressure was on. The next day at work, Jessica was greeted with the usual cold stares. But this time, something was different. Karen had called a meeting for all employees, and Jessica's stomach twisted as she made her way to the conference room. What now? Another lecture about her behavior? Or worse, would they announce her termination in front of everyone? When Jessica walked into the room, she was surprised to see a large group of employees gathered around. Everyone looked tense, but no one dared to speak. Karen and Bob stood at the front, their faces stern, their eyes scanning the room like hawks. "Good morning, everyone," Karen began, her voice clipped. "As you all know, we've been experiencing some challenges with workplace dynamics recently. And while I believe in freedom of speech and diverse opinions, there are lines that should not be crossed. We're a team, and the success of our company depends on our ability to work together, even when we disagree." Jessica felt her heart pounding in her chest. It was clear Karen was addressing the situation indirectly, but everyone knew it was aimed at her. "We're implementing new guidelines for communication moving forward," Karen continued. "We expect all team members to follow these rules and contribute to a respectful and professional work environment. This is not just about personal opinion. It's about maintaining a cohesive and productive team." As Karen spoke, Jessica felt a wave of frustration rise within her. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had always been a team player, always gone above and beyond. Now, it felt like her very voice, her ability to express herself, was being stifled. But then, in the midst of Karen's speech, a hand shot up from the back of the room. It was Susan. Jessica's eyes widened. She hadn't expected Susan to speak up, especially after everything that had happened. Susan had barely spoken to her since the incident, and now, here she was, raising her hand in the middle of the meeting. "Actually, Karen," Susan said, her voice steady but with a hint of discomfort, "I think we need to reconsider this approach. I know there's been a lot of tension, but silencing one person's opinion isn't the way to resolve it. We all have a responsibility to make sure everyone feels heard, even if we don't agree with them." The room fell into stunned silence. Jessica's heart skipped a beat. Could it be? Was Susan actually defending her? "I agree with Susan," another voice chimed in from across the room. It was Mark, another colleague who had always kept his distance from the office politics. "Jessica's entitled to her opinion, just like the rest of us. If we want to have a productive conversation, we need to make space for all views, not just the ones that are comfortable." Jessica could hardly believe what she was hearing. The support came from unexpected places, and suddenly, the tension in the room seemed to loosen. Karen looked at the room, her expression hardening. "This is not a debate," she snapped. "The guidelines are final." But the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted. Jessica wasn't alone in this battle anymore. As the meeting concluded and her colleagues filed out of the room, Jessica's mind raced. Was this the beginning of something bigger? Could she fight back? Could they all fight back against the silencing of free speech in the workplace? One thing was certain. Jessica wasn't going to give up without a fight. The days following the meeting had been a whirlwind. On one hand, Jessica was grateful for the support she'd received from Susan and Mark. It had given her the strength to stand a little taller in the office, to continue pushing forward despite the mounting tension. But on the other hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking on a tightrope. One misstep, and it would all come crashing down. It was Thursday afternoon when she received an unexpected email from Bob, the HR manager. The subject line read, "Private meeting request." Her pulse quickened. She had an idea of what this could mean. Karen had made it clear that the company's stance on her behavior was firm. Yet, part of her still clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this mess. When Jessica entered Bob's office the next morning, she was greeted by a tense silence. Bob was sitting behind his desk, and across from him was a lawyer, a woman in a sharp suit with cold, calculating eyes. "Good morning, Jessica," Bob began, his voice neutral. "Please have a seat." Jessica sat down slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. "What's this about?" The lawyer spoke up. "I'm Melanie Carter, and I'm here representing the company in regards to a matter of misconduct." The word misconduct hit Jessica like a slap in the face. She had been preparing for this moment, but hearing it out loud made everything seem so much more real, so much more final. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her nerves. "I don't understand," Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I defended my position. I shared my opinion. Is that a crime?" Melanie's expression remained unreadable. "The issue here, Jessica, isn't your opinion. It's the environment you've created. Your comments about Elon Musk have created a division within the company, and it's been determined that your actions have violated our policies regarding maintaining a respectful and productive workplace." Jessica's chest tightened. "So, what are you saying? Are you firing me?" Bob interjected, his voice softer now. "We're not at that point yet, but we've decided that we need to issue a formal warning. If there are any further incidents, we may be forced to take more severe action." Jessica sat there, stunned. A formal warning? It felt like a slap in the face. After everything she had done, after all the sacrifices, this was the best she could hope for? She wanted to argue, to tell them how unfair this all was, but the words felt stuck in her throat. She had been so sure that her actions were justified, that she had the right to speak her mind. But now, as she sat across from the lawyer, she wondered if it had all been a mistake. "Jessica," Bob continued, his tone gentle now, "I know you've worked hard for this company, and we appreciate your contributions. But you need to understand that we have to look at the bigger picture. The company's reputation, the team dynamic, these things matter." Her mind raced. She wanted to tell them that what mattered most was standing up for what she believed in, that no matter how uncomfortable things got, she wouldn't back down. But she knew the stakes were higher now. The tension in the office was unbearable, and every day felt like she was walking on eggshells. She had to make a choice. Would she keep fighting for her beliefs, even if it meant losing everything? Or would she swallow her pride, apologize, and try to move forward? As she left Bob's office, her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. She couldn't help but think of Jake, her son. What would he think of her if she lost her job? What would she tell him? She couldn't afford to be reckless, to put everything they had worked for at risk. But then, as she stepped into the elevator and the doors slid shut, something unexpected happened. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "Jessica?" She looked up, startled. It was Susan. She had never seen her so serious. "Susan," Jessica said, trying to steady her voice. "What's going on?" "I'm sorry to hear about the meeting with HR," Susan said quietly. "I know this whole thing has been hard on you." Jessica nodded, unsure of what to say. "It's just, I don't know if I can keep doing this. I'm losing everything. My job, my reputation. It's all falling apart." Susan's eyes softened. "I get it, but you're not alone in this, Jessica. I've been talking to some of the other team members. We all agree that this company can't just shut down opinions. We need to stand together." Jessica blinked, surprised. "What do you mean?" "We're with you," Susan said, her voice low but firm. "If you go down, we go down with you." Jessica felt a wave of emotion flood her chest. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she wasn't fighting this battle alone. "But what about your jobs?" Jessica asked. "You could lose everything too." "We know the risks," Susan replied. "But if we don't fight for what's right, then what's the point? We've all been afraid to speak up, but now it's time. We can't let the company silence us." Jessica stood there for a moment, the weight of her decision hanging in the air. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about all of them. The employees who had been quietly suffering under the company's policies, afraid to speak out, afraid to lose their jobs. Suddenly, everything became clear. Jessica wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her coworkers, for their right to have a voice, for their right to stand up for what they believed in. "Thank you, Susan," Jessica said, her voice thick with emotion. I won't let you down. As the elevator doors opened, Jessica stepped out, her resolve stronger than ever. She didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain. She was going to fight. Not just for her job, but for the future of every person in that office who felt like they had no voice. The following week felt like a storm brewing. Jessica couldn't shake the adrenaline that pulsed through her veins as she thought about the support Susan had offered her. She had never felt so conflicted in her life. On one hand, she feared the consequences of her actions, but on the other, the sense of solidarity was something she couldn't ignore. Her colleagues, people she had worked alongside for years, were behind her, ready to make a stand. But what was that stand going to look like? Could they really make a difference? Jessica spent the next few days quietly gathering information, talking to as many coworkers as she could without drawing too much attention. Susan had been right. There were others who felt the same way, who were tired of the corporate silencing that seemed to have become the company's culture. She'd already spoken to Mark and a few others, and they had agreed to take action. On Thursday afternoon, they gathered in a small conference room, away from prying eyes. Mark, Susan, and a few others had shown up, and Jessica felt a surge of hope. She wasn't alone in this fight. We need to decide how we're going to handle this, Jessica said, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. Karen and Bob are already looking for any excuse to fire me. If we don't act soon, it's going to be too late. Mark leaned forward, his brow furrowed. It's not just about you anymore, Jess. It's about everyone in this office. We've been silently suffering under this culture of fear for too long. I know, Jessica replied, her heart heavy, but if we take action, we risk everything. Our jobs, our reputations, even our careers. Susan spoke up, her voice surprisingly firm. But staying silent means we let them win. We let them control us. We've seen the kind of company they want to build. A place where we're all afraid to speak our minds. We can't let that happen. Jessica looked around the room at her colleagues. Each of them had expressed concern in the past, but now, seeing the resolve in their eyes, she knew they were ready. This wasn't just about speaking up anymore. It was about standing up for something much bigger than any of them. I don't want to just survive here, Jessica said. I want to make a change. Not just for us, but for anyone who feels like their voice doesn't matter. If we don't speak out now, who will? There was a moment of silence in the room as everyone absorbed her words. Finally, Mark nodded. You're right, he said, but we need to be smart about this. We can't just storm into HR and demand they change everything. We need a strategy. The next hour was spent brainstorming, figuring out the best course of action. They discussed everything, from gathering signatures for a petition to arranging a formal meeting with the company's executives. But as they talked, it became clear. The stakes were rising. The more they pushed, the more they risked. And with the company already on edge, one wrong move could cost them everything. Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The company's atmosphere was tense, and each day she went into work, it felt like she was being watched. Her every move was under scrutiny. One mistake, and she would be out the door. By the end of the week, Jessica had made up her mind. The battle had to escalate. If she and her colleagues didn't act soon, they would lose any chance of change. The following Monday morning, Jessica walked into the office with a renewed sense of determination. She'd scheduled a meeting with HR, but this time, it wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had been silently suffering in the shadows. As she entered the HR department, Bob was sitting at his desk, looking as impassive as ever. He didn't seem surprised to see her. Jessica, he said, his voice tight. What can I do for you? I need to speak with Karen, Jessica replied firmly. And I need to do it now. Bob raised an eyebrow. This isn't a good time. It doesn't matter, Jessica said, her voice growing steadier with each word. This can't wait. I'm bringing in a group of employees. We're not going to stay silent anymore. Bob blinked, clearly taken aback. He opened his mouth to protest, but Jessica was already walking toward Karen's office. She didn't wait for permission. This time, she was taking control. When she knocked on the door and entered, Karen was sitting at her desk, reviewing papers. She looked up, and for a moment, their eyes locked in silence. There was a tense stillness in the room as Jessica closed the door behind her. What's this about, Jessica? Karen asked, her voice laced with caution. I've come to make sure you understand something, Jessica said, her voice unwavering. This company isn't just about policies and guidelines. It's about the people who work here, the ones who make it run. And if you continue to stifle our voices, you're going to lose more than just me. Karen narrowed her eyes. What are you talking about? You've been pushing us into a corner, Jessica said, the words coming faster now. You've created a culture of fear where people are afraid to speak their minds. But we're not going to let you keep doing this. We're taking a stand. Karen's expression hardened. I'm warning you, Jessica. This isn't the way to handle things. I'm not asking for permission anymore, Jessica replied. We're asking for change. If you want us to be a real team, we need to be able to speak honestly, to have our voices heard. No more silencing us. If we don't get that, we'll be forced to take this higher. Just then, the door opened behind her, and one by one, Susan, Mark, and several others walked in, their faces determined. They stood behind Jessica, their presence solid and unwavering. Karen's face flushed with anger as she looked at the group. You think you can just walk in here and demand change? This is a business, not a democracy. Jessica stood her ground. This is about people, Karen. And if you can't see that, maybe you're the one who doesn't belong here. The days following the showdown in Karen's office were a blur of nervous anticipation and tense silence. Jessica's decision to take a stand had shaken the very foundation of the company. Word had spread quickly throughout the office, and by the end of the week, nearly everyone knew about the confrontation. Some were supportive, others fearful, and a few whispered that Jessica had gone too far. But for Jessica, the consequences were more immediate. Monday morning was a cruel wake-up call. She walked into the office with a sense of resolve, but as soon as she passed through the front doors, she could feel the atmosphere had shifted. The usual chatter had been replaced by a hushed murmur, and eyes followed her as she made her way to her desk. It was as if the entire office had become a pressure cooker, the tension rising by the second. As she sat down at her desk, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Susan. Susan, HR wants to meet with you. They didn't say why, but it's probably about what happened last week. Jessica's heart skipped a beat. She had expected this, of course, but now that it was happening, it felt like the moment of truth. Her fight was no longer hypothetical. She had made her move, and now she had to deal with the fallout. Minutes later, Bob appeared at her desk. Jessica, he said, his voice tense but controlled. Can you come with me? Karen wants to see you. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Jessica stood up, trying to steady her breath. As she walked toward the HR department, her mind raced. What would happen now? Would they fire her on the spot? Would they reprimand her and threaten to cut her off from the rest of the team? The uncertainty gnawed at her. When she entered Karen's office, the atmosphere was icy. Karen sat behind her desk, and Bob was standing next to her, his arms crossed. It was clear from the moment Jessica walked in that this wasn't going to be a friendly meeting. Have a seat, Jessica, Karen said coldly. Jessica took a deep breath and sat down, her heart pounding. She tried to remain calm, but the pressure was overwhelming. We've discussed your recent actions, Karen began, her voice clipped. And while we respect your right to have an opinion, what happened last week went beyond acceptable conduct in the workplace. You've disrupted the entire office environment, and frankly, we cannot afford to have employees behaving this way. Jessica clenched her fists, but she refused to let her anger show. I didn't create the disruption, Karen. I simply spoke the truth. You can't silence me for that. Bob shot her a warning look, but Karen continued, unfazed. This isn't just about your opinion, Jessica. It's about the way you've handled it. You've alienated your colleagues, and now we're seeing the fallout. Several team members have already expressed concerns about your behavior. They feel uncomfortable, and in some cases, they're afraid to speak up because of the atmosphere you've created. Jessica's mind raced. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. You're blaming me for what happened, she asked incredulously. What about the culture you've created here? You've silenced people for years, Karen. You've turned this place into a prison where no one can speak their mind. Karen's face darkened. That's enough, Jessica. We're not here to debate the company's policies. We're here to discuss your future with this organization. Jessica's stomach churned. She could already feel the walls closing in. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "We've decided that you need to take a leave of absence," Karen said, her tone final. "We need time to assess the situation and determine whether or not you can continue here." Jessica felt a wave of shock wash over her. A leave of absence? It sounded like the company was giving her a chance to step back, to rethink her actions. But she knew better. This was a form of punishment, a way to isolate her, to weaken her resolve. "And if I don't take the leave?" she asked, her voice growing steady with defiance. Karen didn't answer immediately. The silence hung thick in the air. Bob exchanged a glance with Karen, but it was clear they were both waiting for Jessica's response. "If you refuse," Karen finally said, her voice laced with authority, "we will be forced to take further action. A formal termination is still on the table." The words hit Jessica like a slap to the face. Her mind spun. This was it. They were pushing her to the brink. She had to make a decision. Did she back down and accept the leave of absence, or did she continue to fight, knowing the consequences could be disastrous? Jessica took a long breath, steadying herself. "I'll take the leave," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "But know this, Karen, I'm not backing down. You can try to silence me, but you'll never stop me from speaking the truth." Karen didn't respond, but the look in her eyes said it all. She had won this round. For now. As Jessica walked out of Karen's office, her mind raced. She had been given a temporary reprieve, but it was clear the company wasn't finished with her. They would continue to try to break her, to bend her to their will. But Jessica wasn't the same woman she had been when she first walked into the office weeks ago. She had found something within herself that she hadn't known was there. Strength, courage, and an unwavering sense of purpose. She would use her time away from the office to rally support, to plan the next steps in her battle. She wouldn't let this defeat her. The fight was far from over. The days following her forced leave of absence felt like an eternity. Jessica spent most of her time at home, pacing her living room, trying to process everything that had happened. The weight of her decision to stand up to the company's oppressive culture was heavier than she had anticipated. But she wasn't going to let it break her. She couldn't. As she sat by the window one evening, staring out at the city below, Jessica thought about her son, Ethan. The thought of him kept her grounded. If she didn't fight for herself, for what she believed in, then who would? She wanted him to grow up in a world where people weren't afraid to speak their truth, no matter the cost. It was then that her phone buzzed, breaking the silence in the room. It was a text from an unknown number. Unknown, "Hey Jessica, it's Blake. I think we need to talk." Blake? She didn't recognize the name immediately, but the familiarity of the text made her curious. It didn't take long for her to remember. Blake was one of the senior managers at the company, someone who had always kept a low profile and had stayed out of the spotlight. He had been working at the company for years and had a reputation for being fiercely loyal to the leadership. At least, that's what everyone thought. She stared at the message for a moment, wondering what this could mean. Was it a trap? Was he trying to get her to back down? But something in her gut told her it wasn't. There was a sincerity in the message that she couldn't ignore. Without overthinking it, she replied, "Jessica, Blake? What do you want to talk about?" A few moments later, Blake's reply came through. "Blake, I know what you're going through, Jessica. I've been watching everything unfold. I'm not okay with what's happening either. We need to meet." Jessica's heart skipped a beat. Was he really offering support? She didn't know if she could trust him, but the fact that he had reached out, especially given his position, was a sign that something was changing. She had nothing to lose. She had already risked everything by taking a stand. What was one more leap of faith? She quickly texted back, "Jessica, okay. Where and when?" They agreed to meet at a small coffee shop near her apartment the next morning. When Jessica arrived, Blake was already seated at a corner table, looking more relaxed than she had expected. He was dressed in business casual, but there was an air of discontent about him that she hadn't noticed before. He didn't look like the loyal company man she remembered from her early days at the office. As she approached the table, Blake looked up and smiled, albeit faintly. "Thanks for meeting me, Jessica." "Of course," she replied, sitting down across from him. "I'm curious, though. Why now?" Why reach out to me? Blake took a deep breath before speaking. I've been watching what's been happening in the office. I don't agree with the way Karen and Bob have handled things, and I can't keep pretending everything's fine. I know the company isn't what it used to be, and the direction it's headed in isn't one I'm comfortable with. Jessica raised an eyebrow, surprised by the honesty in his tone. So, you're saying you want to help me? Blake nodded. I'm offering my support. I can't change everything overnight, but I've got connections, people in higher places who aren't happy with the current leadership. If you want to keep pushing this, I can help you get the attention you need. Jessica leaned forward, her interest piqued. What exactly are you suggesting? Blake looked around the coffee shop, as if to make sure no one was listening, then lowered his voice. I've been gathering information. There are people who feel the same way you do. Employees who are afraid to speak up, but who know this company has lost its way. I can introduce you to some of them. We can start building a movement from the inside. Jessica's mind raced. This was everything she had been hoping for. A chance to not only keep fighting, but to gain the leverage she needed to really make an impact. How do we do this? Blake slid a business card across the table. I can set up a meeting with a few key people. If you're serious about making change, this is your chance. Jessica glanced at the card. It was from an organization she had never heard of before, but the name alone, Corporate Accountability Alliance, sent a chill down her spine. The Alliance? Was this some kind of underground group? Who are they? She asked. They're a group of like-minded individuals, some current employees, some former. They've been fighting against corporate corruption and leadership abuse for years. They're discreet, but they have resources and power. They've been looking for someone to step up, and I think you're the one. The weight of his words sank in. Jessica had always known that her battle was more than just about her job. It was about confronting a system of power and control that reached far beyond the company's walls. If she could align herself with the Alliance, it could be the turning point she needed. She looked at Blake, her mind made up. Let's do it. I'm in. Blake smiled, a genuine look of approval crossing his face. I knew you'd be up for it. I'll make the introductions. Get ready, Jessica. This is going to get a lot more interesting. As Jessica left the coffee shop, a sense of hope began to stir inside her. For the first time since everything had fallen apart, she felt like she wasn't alone. She had an ally, and with Blake's help, maybe, just maybe, she could take the fight to a whole new level. The road ahead was uncertain, and the stakes were higher than ever. But one thing was clear. Jessica wasn't backing down. This was only the beginning. The following days were a whirlwind. Blake kept his word, arranging for Jessica to meet the members of the Corporate Accountability Alliance. As she prepared for their first meeting, the gravity of the situation settled in. This was no longer just a matter of standing up for her beliefs. It was about joining a movement that could fundamentally disrupt the status quo. The address Blake had given her was a nondescript office building on the outskirts of the city, far from the corporate skyscrapers that housed her former employer. When Jessica arrived, the building seemed ordinary at first glance. Gray walls, faded windows, and a sense of anonymity. But as she stepped inside, she was hit by an unexpected sense of purpose. This was no ordinary office. This was a headquarters. Blake was already waiting in the lobby, his expression serious. He nodded at Jessica as she approached. "You're here," he said, his voice low but firm. "Ready to meet the team?" Jessica nodded, her nerves buzzing with a mixture of excitement and fear. She followed Blake through a series of hallways, past quiet offices and darkened rooms. Finally, they stopped at a door marked Conference Room. Blake knocked twice before opening the door, revealing a small group of people sitting around a sleek, round table. The room was dimly lit, giving it a clandestine feel, but it was clear that this wasn't a space for casual conversation. The individuals gathered there were serious, focused, and clearly accustomed to operating in the shadows. Blake gestured for Jessica to sit, and she did, feeling the weight of the moment. "Jessica, these are the key members of the Corporate Accountability Alliance," Blake began, introducing each person one by one. "This is Sarah," he said, pointing to a woman in her late 30s who wore glasses and had a no-nonsense look about her. "She's been with the Alliance for a few years now. She knows the ins and outs of corporate networks like nobody else." Sarah gave Jessica a sharp nod but didn't speak. Jessica noticed the intensity in her eyes, a focus that was hard to ignore. "This is Tom," Blake continued, pointing to a middle-aged man with a casual demeanor but a deep weariness in his eyes. "He's one of our researchers. He's got a knack for uncovering hidden connections and corporate malfeasance." Tom offered a small wave, but like Sarah, his attention was fully on Jessica, sizing her up. "And finally, this is Marcus," Blake finished, pointing to a tall man with short-cropped hair and a quiet, serious air. "Marcus handles logistics. If we need to move quickly, he's the one who makes things happen." Marcus didn't say much, but his steady gaze and solid presence made Jessica feel as though this was not the time for small talk. She was here to join a cause, not to waste time. Blake took a seat at the table, and the others followed suit. For a moment, there was an uncomfortable silence. Then Sarah spoke. "We've been following you, Jessica. Your actions have caught our attention. You're brave, but you're also risking a lot. Are you sure you're ready to take this to the next level?" Jessica didn't hesitate. "I'm sure. I've already lost my job. I'm not backing down now." Blake smiled faintly. "That's what we like to hear." Sarah nodded. "Good. Here's the deal. We're not just talking about making waves in a single company. The alliance is about exposing systemic corruption, abuse of power, and exploitation across industries. We've been quietly gathering information on executives, CEOs, and companies for years. We have access to data, insider accounts, and leaks that could bring down some of the most powerful figures in corporate America." Jessica's heart raced. This was bigger than she had imagined. "So, you've been working on this for years?" "Longer," Tom interjected. "But we've been careful. You don't take down giants overnight. We've gathered information, built alliances, and made sure we're always 2 steps ahead. But now," he paused, and his voice dropped to a whisper. "Now, with you, we have someone who can go public. Someone who's already in the fight." Jessica leaned forward. "You're talking about me?" "Yes," Marcus said quietly. "We believe you can help us shift the balance of power. You're not just fighting for your job anymore. You're fighting for something much bigger. And we're ready to back you up." Blake added, "We have the resources to give you the support you need. Media contacts, legal backing, even financial resources if necessary. You're not alone in this." Jessica's mind swirled with possibilities. This wasn't just a fight for her job or her reputation anymore. It was a fight for transparency, for justice, for an entire system that was broken. And with this group, she could potentially bring about real change. But it wasn't going to be easy. The stakes were higher than ever. "So, what's the plan?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with anticipation. Sarah looked at her seriously. "We've been collecting evidence on several key executives, including Karen and Bob. But we need someone on the inside who can provide us with first-hand accounts, insider knowledge, and most importantly, help us gain access to company-wide data." Jessica's stomach tightened. She hadn't signed up for corporate espionage, but she realized this was what it would take to bring down the system. Blake caught her hesitation. "I know this is a lot to process, Jessica, but think about it. This is bigger than just your company. This is about holding people accountable, people who think they're untouchable." Jessica swallowed hard. She knew what she had to do. "I'm in," she said finally, her voice firm. "I'll do whatever it takes." The room seemed to exhale collectively. Sarah gave a sharp nod, and Tom smiled. Marcus said nothing, but his silent approval was unmistakable. Blake spoke last. "Good. We'll begin immediately. But remember, this is a war, and you've just stepped onto the battlefield." As Jessica left the meeting, her heart was pounding. The road ahead was uncertain, and the risks were enormous, but for the first time in weeks, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for a cause, for a change that was long overdue, and she had an army behind her. The days following Jessica's decision to join the Corporate Accountability Alliance were a blur of meetings, strategies, and preparations. Blake, Sarah, Tom, and Marcus kept her in the loop, ensuring that every step she took was calculated, deliberate, and, most importantly, safe. They had a plan, and Jessica was about to take her first step in a much bigger game than she ever anticipated. The first task was simple enough: gather intel. The Alliance had already started compiling information on Karen, Bob, and a few of the company's other top executives, but they needed Jessica to get closer, inside the company, to get first-hand access to sensitive documents, internal communications, and any evidence of corporate malfeasance. She was, after all, still employed as a contractor, though her status was unofficial, and her resignation hadn't been processed yet. The Alliance believed it would provide her with the cover she needed to move around undetected, for now. That evening, Jessica found herself sitting alone in her dimly lit living room, staring at her phone. She had a single message from Blake: "Tomorrow's the day. Be ready." She felt a wave of nerves. This wasn't a simple investigation. This was her chance to bring down an empire, or to fall flat on her face. Jessica spent the night preparing. She packed a small bag with essentials: her laptop, a backup phone, a notebook, and a pen. She also carried a small voice recorder. The more evidence they could gather, the better. If things went sideways, it would be crucial to have everything documented. She couldn't afford to make mistakes. Not now. Not with so much on the line. The next morning, she arrived at the company's downtown office, feeling the familiar mix of anxiety and determination. The security guard at the front desk waved her through with little more than a glance. Her access badge, still valid despite her leave of absence, allowed her to move freely around the building. The hum of fluorescent lights and the buzz of office chatter reminded her of her old life, before everything had spiraled out of control. It felt strange to be back, but she didn't have time to dwell on it. Today, her mission was clear: gather as much intel as possible without being detected. Her first stop was the HR department. If there was one thing she knew, it was that the heart of any corporation was its records. Employee files, contracts, performance reviews, all of it could provide valuable insight into the inner workings of the company. She had memorized the layout of the office during her time there, and she knew the HR office would be empty for the next hour, as most of the team would be in a meeting. She moved quickly down the hallway, her steps purposeful. The HR office was tucked away in a corner of the floor, the door slightly ajar. She pushed it open, pretending to look casual, though her pulse quickened. Inside, there were rows of filing cabinets and several computer terminals. It was a treasure trove of information, just waiting to be explored. She went straight to the computer, sitting down at one of the desks. With a few keystrokes, she bypassed the password screen. She'd spent weeks memorizing the system's security protocols, and it was paying off now. She quickly found the internal database and accessed the employee files. Her heart raced as she scrolled through names, departments, and sensitive reports. She focused on the files of Karen, Bob, and a few other executives who had been part of the decisions that led to Jessica's dismissal. It wasn't just about finding dirt on them, though that was certainly a part of it. It was about understanding how deeply embedded corruption had become, and whether there were any specific actions that could lead to a legal case. As Jessica downloaded files onto a portable hard drive, she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps outside the door. She froze, panic bubbling up in her chest. She couldn't afford to get caught now, not when she was so close to gathering what they needed. She quickly shut down the computer and slipped into one of the back closets just as the door to the HR office opened. She held her breath, hoping the intruder wouldn't notice anything amiss. The figure who entered was unfamiliar, someone from the finance department, likely on a routine visit. Jessica waited, watching through a small crack in the closet door, until they left. Her heart was still pounding when she finally allowed herself to exhale. It had been close. Too close. She didn't waste any more time. She grabbed the hard drive and headed for the back exit of the building, taking care to avoid the main hallways where she could be spotted by colleagues. Her nerves were shot, but she had what she came for. That night, Blake met her at a quiet cafe near her apartment. She handed over the hard drive with the information she had gathered. Blake raised an eyebrow, impressed. "You got everything we need?" Jessica nodded, though she could see the tension in his face. He wasn't used to celebrating victories this small, but it was a crucial first step. "You're doing great, Jessica," Blake said, though there was a hint of caution in his voice. "But we're just getting started. The real challenge comes next." Jessica's stomach tightened. She knew what he meant. If this data was as valuable as they hoped, it would likely attract the attention of the people they were targeting. She couldn't afford to make another mistake. "Do you think they'll find out?" Jessica asked, her voice tinged with worry. Blake's expression hardened. "They might, but we'll be ready. This is just the beginning, Jessica. We've got the files. Now we take the fight to them. But remember, this won't be over until we're on the right side of history." As Jessica walked home that night, the weight of their mission settled in. She wasn't just a whistleblower anymore. She was part of something much bigger, and she knew it would take everything she had to see it through. The next few days were filled with a palpable sense of tension. Jessica could feel it in the air as she went about her daily routine, the unease creeping into her every step. The hard drive had been handed off, and the team at the Alliance was already diving into the data she'd gathered. But Jessica knew it was only a matter of time before their actions would attract the attention of the very people they were trying to expose. Blake, Sarah, and Tom kept in constant communication, updating her on their progress, but it was clear that things were escalating. With every piece of evidence they uncovered, the stakes grew higher, and the risks became more dangerous. Jessica sat in her apartment late one night, going over the details from the information she'd helped acquire. She was surrounded by notes and documents scattered across her table, proof of corruption, cover-ups, and questionable financial deals. There were names, dates, transactions, all the things that could bring down the executives at the top. But what stood out most to Jessica was a series of encrypted communications between Karen and a few outside partners, discussing discrete solutions to potential legal threats. It was chilling. Her phone buzzed on the table, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Sarah. "We've made some headway, but I think they're on to us. Be careful." Jessica's heart skipped a beat. What did Sarah mean? Who was they? She quickly typed back, "What do you mean, onto us?" The response came fast. "There are signs. We've noticed unusual activity in the company's internal network. It's not just about you anymore. They know someone's been leaking information. Stay sharp." Jessica's fingers trembled as she set the phone down. The threat wasn't just hypothetical anymore. It was real. The people she was up against had resources, connections, and power. They wouldn't hesitate to protect themselves, no matter the cost. The next morning, she headed to the office early, trying to maintain her usual routine. She didn't want to raise suspicion, but every time she glanced around, she felt like eyes were watching her. Was it paranoia? Or was someone really onto her? Jessica's instincts told her to be cautious. She avoided the areas where she used to work closely with her team, keeping her movements as casual as possible. She stopped by HR again, just to check if there was anything new in the system, but as she walked through the hallways, something felt off. She rounded the corner to the break room and froze. There, sitting at one of the tables, was Karen. But she wasn't alone. Bob was there too. Their heads were close together as they spoke in low, hushed tones, their voices barely audible. Jessica's pulse quickened. The last thing she wanted was to get caught in a conversation with them, so she stepped back, ducking behind a large potted plant. Her heart was pounding, her mind racing. Had they seen her? Were they talking about her? She couldn't risk being noticed, not when things were so delicate. After a few moments, she peeked around the corner again. Karen and Bob were gone, but the unease in Jessica's chest remained. She had to be more careful. Later that day, as she was sitting in her cubicle, a strange email notification popped up on her screen. It was from an unknown address. The subject line simply read, "We're watching." Her breath caught in her throat. The message was short, cryptic. "You think you're clever, but you're not. We know what you're doing, and we're not going to let it slide. You've been warned." The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She quickly deleted the email, but the fear that gripped her didn't go away. It was clear. Someone was onto her. She glanced around the office, trying to act normal, but everything felt off. She was constantly scanning her surroundings, wondering if anyone was watching her every move. Was it someone from the company? Or had the Alliance's actions already drawn unwanted attention from the very people they were targeting? As soon as she could, Jessica texted Blake, "I got a message. Someone knows." Blake's reply was immediate. "Stay calm. We've been expecting this. It's just a scare tactic. Don't let it shake you. We'll keep moving forward." "What now?" Jessica typed back. "Now we move faster. We need to get the next set of data, something bigger." They won't expect it. Jessica's nerves were shot. She was operating on a razor's edge now, constantly walking a tightrope. One misstep, and it could all come crashing down. But she couldn't back out. Not now. Not when she was so close. That evening, she met with the Alliance team at their usual spot. Blake, Sarah, Tom, and Marcus were all there, huddled around a table with laptops and documents spread out before them. The atmosphere was tense. "Everything okay?" Blake asked as Jessica sat down, her face pale from lack of sleep and the constant stress. "I don't know," Jessica admitted. "I think they know. I got a message this morning. Someone's watching me. And I saw Karen and Bob talking in the break room. They were too close." Sarah looked at her, her expression hardening. "They might be testing you, trying to see if you slip up. But they won't get away with it." "We have to move quickly," Marcus added, his voice steady. "This is our best shot. If we pull this off, we can expose everything." Jessica nodded, but the unease wouldn't leave her. She was in too deep now. The stakes were too high. If she didn't stay ahead of them, the entire operation could be compromised. "Let's get to work," Blake said, his tone firm. "We have no time to waste." As the team worked through the night, Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that they were being hunted. And soon, they would have to decide. Keep pushing forward or risk being caught in the act. The weeks that followed felt like a blur. Jessica's mind was constantly spinning with the mounting pressure of balancing her undercover investigation, her work at the company, and her home life. She hadn't seen Emma in what felt like days, too many late nights spent poring over documents and encrypting data. But it wasn't just the exhaustion that was wearing her down. It was the constant fear that she was being watched. Blake's team had been making progress, but so had Karen and the others. It was becoming increasingly clear that Jessica wasn't the only one who had something to hide. Karen had become more calculating in her actions, and Bob's sudden interest in company-wide security protocols was too coincidental. There were whispers in the halls. Employees who were once friendly had grown cold, suspicious of each other. Jessica had even noticed some of her former colleagues avoiding her, turning their heads when she walked by, and speaking in hushed tones when she entered a room. One evening, as Jessica left work later than usual, she received a call from Sarah. The urgency in her friend's voice immediately set her on edge. "We've got a problem," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "They know we've been looking into them. They've ramped up security at the office. They're digging into everyone who's been involved with us. You're a target now." Jessica's stomach sank. "What does that mean? What do they know?" "We don't have all the details yet, but it's bad. They've already started looking into your work history, your personal files. You need to get out. You need to go somewhere safe." "Safe?" Jessica repeated. "What about Emma? I can't leave her behind." Sarah was silent for a moment. "I know, Jessica, but you need to think about your safety right now. We can't let them find you. Not now, not when we're so close." Jessica gripped the phone tighter, her fingers trembling. She had worked too hard to back down now. The thought of abandoning the mission was unthinkable. But as the reality of the situation sank in, a sickening feeling of helplessness crept over her. She was being hunted. "I'll figure it out," she finally said, though she didn't feel sure of the decision she had just made. When Jessica hung up the phone, she looked around the empty parking lot where her car was parked. The usual routine of heading home felt like a distant memory. It was no longer just about doing the right thing. It was about survival. At home, she found Emma sitting at the kitchen table, her schoolwork spread out in front of her. The girl looked up at Jessica, her tired eyes searching her face for reassurance. Jessica smiled weakly, trying to suppress the fear that had settled deep in her chest. "Hey, kiddo," she said, her voice betraying the weariness she felt. "How was your day?" "It was fine," Emma replied. "You look tired. You working late again?" Jessica nodded, though it was more than just the late hours that were weighing on her. "Yeah, just a lot to do. But I'm here now. We can spend some time together." But Emma's eyes narrowed. She could always tell when something was wrong. "Mom, what's going on? You look like you're about to cry." Jessica's breath caught. She hated lying to Emma, but she had no choice. Not now. Not when everything was about to crumble. "I'm fine," Jessica said, forcing a smile. "Just a lot on my mind. But I'm okay." Really? Emma didn't seem convinced, but she didn't push. Jessica walked over to the fridge to prepare dinner, but her mind was elsewhere. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the call from Sarah. The Alliance was making their final move, but that meant the risks were becoming insurmountable. If Jessica couldn't stay under the radar, her entire mission could be compromised. The days that followed were marked by heightened caution. Jessica's every move was calculated. She started leaving her phone in different places so it couldn't be tracked. She avoided the company's internal servers and used encrypted methods of communication with the Alliance. Still, every step felt like walking on a tightrope. She had never felt so exposed. Then came the phone call that shattered everything. It was early in the morning, and Jessica had just dropped Emma off at school. She hadn't even made it halfway to work when her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, but something in her gut told her it was important. "Hello?" she answered, her voice tight with apprehension. "Jessica?" The voice on the other end was smooth, calm, but laced with an undeniable menace. "We know what you've been doing. We know you're working with the Corporate Accountability Alliance, and we have everything we need to ruin you." Jessica's blood ran cold. It was Karen's voice. The woman who had once seemed so untouchable now sounded like a predator circling its prey. "Who is this?" Jessica's voice faltered, but she tried to keep her composure. "You're going to stop what you're doing," Karen continued, her tone unflinching. "You're going to forget all about your little alliance and go back to your life. Or I promise, I will make sure your daughter never sees you again." Jessica's heart skipped a beat. "You wouldn't." "I would," Karen said. "I'm sure you know how this works. One call, one wrong move, and everything changes. Your career, your freedom, your relationship with Emma, all gone. It's over." The phone call ended abruptly, and Jessica was left holding the device, her hand trembling uncontrollably. For the first time since this all began, she felt true fear. She could handle the threats, the danger to her career, but the thought of losing Emma, it was something she couldn't even fathom. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but the weight of the decision pressing down on her was suffocating. She was at the breaking point. She didn't know how much longer she could keep going. The stakes were too high. Was it worth it? As she drove to work, her hands clenched the steering wheel, the fear of losing everything gnawing at her. One wrong move, and it could all come crashing down. The weight of the phone call hung over Jessica like a dark cloud. She couldn't concentrate on anything, not the road in front of her, not the day ahead at the office. Her mind replayed Karen's words over and over again, echoing in her head like a broken record. "Your daughter gone." She barely registered pulling into the company parking lot. Her fingers felt numb as she turned off the engine. For a long moment, she sat in the car, staring at the building in front of her. How had things gotten so out of control? She had come so far. She had risked everything, her job, her reputation, her sense of security, to expose the truth about the company and its corrupt leaders. She was so close to unveiling the entire network of deceit that had infected the corporate world. But at what cost? "Emma," Jessica whispered under her breath. Her daughter was the one thing that mattered most in this world. The thought of losing her, of Karen's cold threat becoming reality, made her stomach churn with panic. But what if she backed down? What if she walked away from the investigation, abandoned the alliance, and never looked back? Would she be able to protect Emma from whatever Karen and her people could do? Would the threat stop? Would they leave her alone if she complied? No, Jessica couldn't live with that. She had made a promise to herself when Emma was born that she would do whatever it took to make the world a better place for her, to give her a future free of corruption and injustice. The fight wasn't just about exposing the company. It was about ensuring a better life for her daughter. How could she give up now, when she was so close to making a real difference? But the stakes were higher than ever. She had seen the lengths to which Karen and Bob were willing to go. The situation had spiraled out of control, and there was no guarantee that Jessica's next move wouldn't end in disaster. "Stay calm," she whispered to herself. "You can't back down. You've made it this far. You just need a plan." Jessica took a deep breath and opened the car door. She had to push the fear aside, at least for the moment. There would be time later to figure out what to do. For now, she needed to get through the day, one step at a time. Inside the office, the atmosphere was even more oppressive than usual. The walls seemed to close in on her as she walked through the hallways, her eyes darting nervously at every turn. She had always been good at keeping her emotions in check, but now, her anxiety was written all over her face. She could feel the eyes on her, watching, judging. It was only a matter of time before someone put the pieces together. When she reached her cubicle, she was surprised to find a folder on her desk. It was sealed with the company's confidential stamp. Jessica hesitated for a moment before opening it. Inside, there was a report detailing the company's most recent financial transactions, specifically, a series of questionable transfers between top executives and various offshore accounts. Her heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the evidence that could bring everything crashing down. The proof she had been looking for. But it also meant that she was one step closer to becoming a target. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, interrupting her thoughts. She pulled it out and saw a message from Blake. "We have what we need. It's time to expose them. This is the endgame." "Is it?" Jessica texted back, her fingers trembling. "They're coming after me." Karen made it clear that they know everything. Blake's reply came quickly. "We can't stop now. You've come too far. We'll protect you. We're in this together." Jessica stared at the screen for a long time. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that they could somehow come out of this unscathed. But deep down, she knew that there was no easy way out of this. Suddenly, a shadow loomed over her cubicle. She looked up to find Karen standing there, her expression cold and unreadable. "Jessica," Karen said in a low voice, her eyes scanning her face. "We need to talk." Jessica's heart pounded in her chest. She forced herself to stand, putting the folder down and straightening her back. "About what?" Karen's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "About your future here. About your little side project. I think we both know where this is going." Jessica's stomach twisted. She didn't know what Karen was getting at, but she knew it couldn't be good. "We're not going to let this slide, Jessica," Karen continued. "You've been a thorn in our side for too long. And now, it's time for you to face the consequences. You can walk away now, quietly. Or we can make sure you never work again. Not here. Not anywhere." Jessica's mind raced. She had always known that Karen was ruthless, but hearing the threat laid out so plainly made her stomach churn. There was no way out. Karen had her cornered. But then Jessica remembered the folder. The evidence. This was her chance. If she didn't act now, she would lose everything. Not just her career, but the future she wanted to build for Emma. She stood tall, meeting Karen's gaze. "I won't back down," Jessica said, her voice steady but resolute. "You can't stop me. I've already won." Karen's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Jessica standing alone in the cubicle, her heart racing. The game had changed. It was no longer just about exposing the truth. It was about survival. And Jessica wasn't going down without a fight. The tension in the air was palpable, almost suffocating. Every breath Jessica took felt like she was holding it just a little too long, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It was clear now. Karen wasn't just a threat to her career. She was a direct threat to Jessica's life. And Karen's warning had struck a nerve. Jessica was on the edge, but there was no turning back. After Karen's confrontation in the office, Jessica had gone into survival mode. She had no time to second-guess herself. Every decision felt like it could be her last, every phone call a potential trap. The evidence she had was critical. Documents that linked the company's executives to illegal financial dealings, hidden accounts, and even bribery. If she could get this information into the right hands, it could bring everything crashing down. But first, she had to get out of the office alive. Jessica had made arrangements with Blake to meet later that afternoon. They needed to figure out how to leak the information without exposing her, without making her the target of the company's wrath. She couldn't afford to trust anyone in the office anymore. Not after Karen's warning, not after everything that had happened. It was just her and Blake now. "Mom." Emma's voice echoed from the hallway, pulling Jessica from her thoughts. The sight of her daughter, so innocent and unaware of the chaos unfolding around them, broke her concentration. She smiled faintly as Emma stepped into the room. "Hey, kiddo," Jessica said. her voice a little too bright. How was school today? It was fine, Emma said, sitting on the couch beside her. But you've been acting weird lately. Are you okay? Jessica's heart tightened. She wanted to reassure Emma, to tell her that everything was fine and that this was just another phase, another difficult time that would soon pass. But she knew that wasn't the truth. And in her gut, she knew that Emma could sense it too. I'm okay, Jessica lied. But the words felt empty. She could feel the lie weigh on her chest, but there was no choice. Not now. Just a lot going on at work. Emma didn't seem convinced, but she didn't push. She was quiet for a long moment before asking, "What's going to happen, Mom? Are we going to be okay?" The question hit Jessica harder than she expected. Emma's voice trembled with the unspoken fear that had been gnawing at them both for weeks. But Jessica refused to break. Not in front of her. Not now. "We'll be okay," she said, her voice low but determined. "We always are. I promise." Emma nodded, though her expression was still uncertain. She hugged Jessica tightly, the embrace offering a moment of peace in the midst of everything. But that peace was fleeting. Later that afternoon, Jessica slipped out of the office early, leaving the building under the cover of darkness. She couldn't risk staying late anymore. Karen would be watching. The company's security was tighter than ever, and Jessica felt every pair of eyes on her back. The drive to the meeting spot felt like an eternity. Every turn seemed like a step closer to her inevitable exposure, but she couldn't back down now. She had to meet Blake. She had to get the truth out there before it was too late. When she arrived at the empty parking lot near the old warehouse, Blake's car was already parked. The dim light of the street lamp cast long shadows, and Jessica could feel the weight of the night pressing down on her. Blake was waiting for her inside the car. "Everything set?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, but the fear was creeping in again. Blake nodded. "We've got everything ready. All the files are encrypted and ready to go. I just need you to confirm the drop." Jessica opened the passenger door and sat down beside him, her mind racing. She knew this was it, the final step. If they didn't leak the information now, they would lose their chance. The company would close in, and she would lose everything. There was no going back. "I'm ready," she said, her voice resolute, but the doubt gnawing at her was hard to ignore. "Let's do it." Blake handed her a small USB drive. "We can't trust the cloud. We'll have to send the data through a secure channel. If we get caught—" "I know," Jessica interrupted, swallowing hard. "If we get caught, we're done." Blake paused, looking at her with a serious expression. "You don't have to do this, Jessica. I know you're scared. I know what's at stake. But we have to be sure you're ready." Jessica clenched her fists. She had thought about running, about disappearing with Emma and leaving it all behind. But the thought of walking away now was unbearable. She couldn't let the people she loved suffer for the company's greed. "I'm ready," she said again, her voice stronger now, though her hands were shaking. "Let's end this." Blake didn't hesitate. He plugged the USB drive into the laptop and began the process of sending the files to a secure server. Jessica's pulse quickened as the progress bar filled, the minutes feeling like hours. They both sat in silence, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, the progress bar reached 100% and the files were sent. "It's done," Blake said, leaning back in his seat. "It's out there." Jessica exhaled slowly, feeling a mix of relief and dread wash over her. The truth was out, but as she sat there, staring at the empty parking lot, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The company wasn't going to let this slide. They would retaliate. And this time, they wouldn't stop until they destroyed her. Blake seemed to read her thoughts. "They won't stop, Jessica. But you've done what you set out to do. You've exposed them. Now we take the fight to them." Jessica nodded, her eyes narrowing with determination. "It's not over yet. It's only just begun." The silence that followed the data leak felt deafening. Jessica sat in the car with Blake, the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. They had done it. The company's dirty secrets were out there for the world to see. But the victory felt hollow. The adrenaline that had surged through her veins only moments ago had dissipated, leaving behind a gnawing sense of dread. Blake's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his face growing pale. Jessica's heart skipped a beat. She could see the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers gripped the steering wheel. "They know," he said, his voice low. "They know it was you." Jessica's stomach lurched. It was inevitable, but hearing it out loud made it all too real. The company had resources, connections. They wouldn't let this go unpunished. "I knew this wouldn't be easy," Jessica replied, her voice barely a whisper. "But we didn't have a choice. The truth had to come out." Blake nodded, his expression grim. "They're not just going to take this lying down. They'll come after you, Jessica. Hard." She knew he was right. Karen and the others weren't the types to simply roll over. They would fight back, and Jessica had just handed them the perfect reason to come for her. But the thought of backing down now, of running, made her feel sick to her stomach. She couldn't quit, not after everything she had sacrificed. "We need to get out of here," Blake said, pulling the car into motion. "Get somewhere safe. Lay low for a while. At least until we can figure out what they're going to do next." Jessica didn't argue. She didn't have the energy. All she could think about was Emma. The fear of what might happen to her daughter if the company found out where they were, if they targeted her family, made Jessica's heart race. They drove in silence for what felt like hours, the dark road stretching out in front of them like an endless maze. Blake kept his eyes on the rearview mirror, checking for any sign that they were being followed. But the further they went, the more Jessica's mind raced. They needed a plan, a safe place to hide. But time was running out. When Blake finally spoke again, his voice was strained. "I got a call from one of my contacts. They're already pulling strings. They've got people looking for you, Jessica. This is bigger than just the company now. This goes beyond them." Jessica felt the cold grip of fear tighten around her chest. She had known the risks, but now the consequences were unfolding in real time. The company was powerful, but this felt different. The game had changed. Whoever was behind the scenes pulling the strings was far more dangerous than she had realized. "Who's pulling the strings?" she asked, her voice a mix of fear and defiance. "Who else is involved in this?" Blake hesitated for a long moment, glancing at her with a mixture of hesitation and resolve. "There are people in high places. People who want this swept under the rug, no matter what. And if you don't play their game, they'll make sure you regret it." Jessica's mind raced. High places. Powerful people. The thought made her stomach turn. She had been so focused on taking down the executives at her company, she hadn't considered that the corruption ran deeper. She had thought that exposing the company's financial crimes would be enough, that it would be a win for the people, for justice. But now, it seemed like she had only scratched the surface. "Where do we go?" she asked, her voice small. "What do we do now?" Blake looked at her, his expression unreadable. "We lay low. We need to disappear, at least for now. I know a few people, some safe houses we can use. But we can't stay in one place too long. And we can't trust anyone. Not anymore." The weight of his words settled over Jessica like a blanket of cold dread. She couldn't stay in hiding forever. Emma couldn't live like this. And as much as she hated to admit it, there was still more work to be done. The truth hadn't fully come out yet. The company wasn't finished fighting, and neither was she. Blake's phone buzzed again, this time with a message from an unknown number. His eyes scanned the screen, his expression darkening. "They've got eyes on us," he muttered. "They know where we are." Jessica's heart pounded. She turned to look out the window, her pulse quickening. The quiet, empty road ahead suddenly felt like a trap. They were being hunted, and there was nowhere to hide. "Drive," she said, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. "Keep moving. Don't stop until we're out of sight." Blake didn't hesitate. He pressed the gas pedal, the car speeding up, the engine roaring as they tore down the road. Jessica gripped the seat, her mind racing as the miles passed in a blur. Every moment felt like an eternity, and every second, she could feel the walls closing in. This was the reckoning. She had exposed the truth. Now, the world, her world, was closing in on her, and there was no telling what would happen next. The tension in the air was unbearable as Jessica and Blake sped through the night. The hum of the engine, the headlights cutting through the darkness, seemed like the only things keeping her grounded. but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was always a step behind. Every turn, every intersection seemed like another trap, another chance for the company to catch up with her. Blake didn't say much as they drove. His knuckles were white as he gripped the wheel, his eyes flicking nervously from the rearview mirror to the road ahead. Jessica's mind was reeling, but she knew they couldn't afford to make any mistakes. They needed to keep moving, to stay ahead of the people who were hunting her. "Where are we going?" she asked, breaking the silence. The question had been nagging at her, but she hadn't had the chance to ask until now. "I need to know. How far are we going?" Blake's jaw tightened. "I know a place. A contact who can help us lay low for a while. But we can't stay there long. We need to keep our heads down, keep moving." Jessica nodded, her stomach churning. She trusted Blake, but everything had changed. Her life had been torn apart in a matter of days, and now she was a fugitive. The fear of being caught, of losing everything she'd fought for, gnawed at her insides. But the thought of Emma being dragged into this, the thought of her daughter in danger, was what kept her going. "We can't keep running forever," she said quietly. "We need to make a plan. We need to fight back." Blake glanced at her, his face hard. "Fighting back isn't as simple as it sounds. You've exposed them, Jessica. But now you're up against people who will stop at nothing to protect their secrets. They'll come after you, after Emma, and they won't hesitate." Jessica's heart sank at the gravity in his voice. "I can't just hide forever, Blake. I've exposed the truth. I've started something, and I can't let them sweep it all under the rug. I won't let them win." Blake was silent for a moment, his eyes focused on the road. Then he spoke again, his voice quieter. "You're right, but you need to be careful. You've made powerful enemies, and they won't stop until they've destroyed everything you've built, everything you care about." Jessica felt the weight of his words settle over her. She couldn't back down now, not when she was so close to bringing down the people who had ruined her life. She just needed to survive long enough to see it through. The car took a sharp turn down a narrow, winding road. The trees on either side seemed to press in, and the darkness felt thicker here, almost suffocating. Jessica's hand instinctively moved to her phone, but before she could check for any messages, her screen flashed with an alert. It was a message from an unknown number. Her pulse quickened as she read the text. "We know where you are. You can't run forever. Turn around. You're not safe." The message sent a chill down Jessica's spine. She gripped the phone tightly, trying to steady her shaking hands. "Blake, someone knows where we are. They're tracking us." Blake's eyes widened, and he immediately glanced around, his focus now sharp. "They've found us already?" He muttered a curse under his breath. "We've got to get off the road. Now." Jessica's heart raced as Blake swerved the car down an even darker path, the tires skidding on loose gravel. They were no longer on a main road, and the trees seemed to close in around them. It felt like they were driving straight into the heart of nowhere, and Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that they were being led into a trap. "Where are we going?" she asked again, her voice more frantic now. "Just trust me," Blake replied, his voice calm but with an edge of urgency. "We're almost there." They drove in tense silence for several more minutes until the car came to a halt in front of an old farmhouse. The place looked abandoned, the windows dark, the yard overgrown with weeds. Jessica wasn't sure what she expected, but this wasn't it. Blake turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Stay here," he said. "I'll check it out. Don't move unless I tell you." Jessica didn't argue. She sat frozen in the passenger seat, her mind racing as she watched Blake disappear into the darkness. She couldn't help but wonder, had Blake led her here to safety, or had he just brought her to her own personal grave? Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. Jessica's eyes darted nervously around, searching for any sign of movement. Every rustling of leaves, every passing car, felt like it could be the moment they were found. And then she heard it, the sound of footsteps. Her heart stopped. She turned to look, expecting Blake. But the shadow she saw wasn't his. It was someone else, a figure emerging from the darkness. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. The figure was tall, cloaked in shadow. The flashlight in his hand illuminated his face for just a moment, and Jessica's blood ran cold. It was her boss, Karen, the last person she had expected to find here. Did you really think you could run? Karen's voice was low, almost amused, but there was no mistaking the venom in her tone. You're not as smart as you think, Jessica. Jessica's mind spun, trying to process the betrayal. Karen, the woman she had once trusted, was here, on the other side. And she was part of the very thing Jessica had fought against. Karen, Jessica whispered, too stunned to move. Karen stepped closer, her smile cold. You really thought I'd let you ruin everything? You don't even understand what you've done. You've exposed us all, and now there's no going back. The cold realization hit Jessica all at once. She had been played. Karen had known from the beginning. Everything, the meetings, the information, the supposed safe house Blake had promised. It had all been a setup. And now, Jessica was trapped. The cold night air felt sharp against Jessica's skin, as if the very atmosphere was closing in on her. She stood frozen, staring at Karen, the woman she had trusted more than anyone. Her mind was a whirl of disbelief. Karen, the woman who had stood beside her through so many challenges, was now the very embodiment of betrayal. You've been a pawn all along, Karen continued, her voice steady but laced with an unmistakable satisfaction. Did you really think you could win this? That you could expose us without consequences? Jessica's heart pounded, her mind racing to catch up with the revelation. Everything that had happened, the leak, the betrayal, the pursuit, had all been orchestrated. Karen was the one pulling the strings behind the scenes. You set me up? Jessica stammered, the weight of the realization sinking in. How could you do this to me? Karen's smile was cold, detached. It's nothing personal, Jessica. This is bigger than you, bigger than any of us. You were a means to an end, and now you're a liability. Jessica felt a cold rush of fear surge through her veins. She had been fighting the wrong battle all along. It wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about people like Karen, people with far too much power who were willing to destroy anyone who got in their way. And now, Jessica was the target. Where's Blake? Jessica demanded, her voice a mix of anger and confusion. You said he was helping me. Was that a lie too? Karen's eyes narrowed, a flash of irritation crossing her face. Blake? He's just another piece in this game, Jessica. You were never meant to get this far. Jessica's stomach churned as the pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. Blake had been part of the setup. He had brought her here, into this trap. She had trusted him, but it had all been a lie. She felt the betrayal deep in her chest, a weight that was almost too much to bear. I won't let you win, Jessica said, her voice suddenly filled with defiance. I'll expose everything. You can't stop me. Karen's laugh was a cruel, hollow sound. You think you still have control? You think you're in charge here? You've lost, Jessica. There's no way out for you. But Jessica wasn't listening anymore. The fight for her life had become a fight for something bigger than herself. She had to expose the truth, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been victimized by this system of corruption. And if that meant taking down Karen and everyone else in her path, then so be it. In the distance, Jessica heard the faint sound of a car's engine, but she didn't turn. Her eyes were locked on Karen, her mind already planning her next move. She had one shot, one chance to escape, to get the evidence she needed to bring down the entire operation. Listen to me, Karen, Jessica said, her voice steady now. You can have everything you want. Power, money, control. But I'll never stop fighting until I make sure you can't hurt anyone else. Karen's face twisted in anger. You don't understand, do you? This isn't about power. This is survival. And you, Jessica, are nothing more than collateral damage. Jessica took a deep breath. She had to act fast. She couldn't let Karen control the narrative. She couldn't let her silence the truth. In a flash, Jessica turned and bolted toward the woods. She didn't look back as she ran, her heart thudding in her chest. The cold wind whipped through her hair, and her feet pounded against the uneven ground. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she couldn't stop. Behind her, she could hear Karen's voice calling out, but Jessica refused to turn around. She had to stay ahead. She had to keep moving. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet shifted. Her ankle twisted on a loose rock, sending her tumbling to the ground. Pain shot through her body, but she gritted her teeth and forced herself up, ignoring the sharp ache in her leg. From the corner of her eye, she saw a figure emerging from the trees. It was Blake. "No, stay away," Jessica screamed, her voice full of desperation. She couldn't trust him. Not anymore. Not after everything he had done. Blake's eyes widened in surprise, but he didn't move closer. Instead, he raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Jessica, wait, please. I didn't want this. I didn't want any of this." "Then why, Blake?" she shouted, tears of anger and frustration welling up in her eyes. "Why did you bring me here? Why did you help them do this?" Blake's face crumpled with guilt. "I was trying to protect you, Jessica. They had already taken everything from you. If you hadn't come to me, they would have found you anyway. I thought I could keep you safe." Jessica shook her head, disbelief and betrayal overwhelming her. "You don't get it. You didn't protect me. You sold me out." There was a long silence, the air thick with tension. Blake took a step forward, his voice softening. "I never meant for it to go this far. I didn't know how dangerous it was until it was too late. But you have to trust me now. There's still time to fix this." Jessica stood her ground, her breathing heavy. "You're right about one thing. There is still time. But it's not on your side, Blake. And it's not on Karen's side either." Blake looked at her with a mixture of regret and determination. "Then what are you going to do?" Jessica's eyes narrowed as she made her decision. "I'm going to make sure the truth comes out, no matter what it costs. And this time, no one will stop me." Without another word, she turned and began running again, her heart pounding in her chest. Behind her, Blake called her name, but Jessica didn't stop. She couldn't. Not now. She had one shot left, and she was going to take it. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the deserted parking lot where Jessica had parked her car. Her breath came in quick bursts, the cold air seeping into her lungs as she stood, hands shaking, in front of the old, run-down warehouse. It was the last place she wanted to be, but it was also the only place where the final piece of the puzzle lay hidden, an encrypted hard drive that could expose everything. The drive had been kept hidden away by one of the company's higher-ups, someone who was now long gone. But before their departure, they'd made sure to secure the data, locking it away in this warehouse for safekeeping. It was the only leverage Jessica had left. She glanced around nervously. The silence of the night seemed to mock her anxiety, but she knew she couldn't afford to be seen. Not now. If Karen, Blake, or anyone else from the company knew she was here, it would be the end of everything. Taking a deep breath, Jessica moved toward the back of the warehouse. The door creaked as she pulled it open, the rusted metal protesting under her touch. She winced at the sound, but pushed forward, stepping into the dimly lit interior. Her eyes quickly adjusted to the darkness, and she scanned the room, looking for any sign of movement. The space was mostly empty, save for a few old crates and discarded equipment. It didn't look like much, but Jessica knew better. Somewhere in the maze of boxes, hidden in a corner where no one would think to look, was the hard drive that could change everything. Jessica moved swiftly, her footsteps barely making a sound on the concrete floor. Her mind raced as she thought about everything that had led her here. The betrayal of people she trusted, the endless lies, and the overwhelming fear of what might happen if she failed. But she couldn't afford to fail. Not now. As she rounded a corner, she spotted a small desk tucked away in the farthest corner of the room. There, under a stack of papers, was a metallic box. Jessica's heart skipped a beat. That was it. She knew it without a doubt. This was the hard drive. With trembling hands, she reached for the box and pulled it out. Her fingers fumbled with the latch, but after a moment, it clicked open. Inside, nestled among a few papers, was the hard drive, gleaming and cold. It felt like the weight of her entire future was contained in that small device. But just as she was about to pick it up, she heard a sound, soft footsteps behind her. Her heart lurched. She wasn't alone. Spinning around, Jessica's breath caught in her throat. Standing in the doorway was Karen. She was holding a flashlight in one hand, her expression unreadable. Well, well, Karen said, her voice low and mocking. I thought we had an agreement, Jessica. You were supposed to stay out of this. You were supposed to leave it all behind. Jessica's mind raced. She had to think fast. If Karen knew she was here, the situation had just escalated. She couldn't let Karen take the drive, not now, not when she was so close. I'm not backing down, Jessica said, her voice steady despite the fear flooding her veins. This isn't just about me anymore, Karen. It's about exposing the truth. Everything you've done, everything you've been hiding, it's all coming to light. Karen stepped into the room, her face twisted with contempt. You think you can just waltz in here and take what's mine? You really think you can change everything? I can, Jessica said, her voice gaining strength. This isn't about you anymore. It's about the people you've hurt, the lies you've told, the lives you've destroyed. Karen's eyes darkened, and for a moment, Jessica thought she saw something like fear flicker in her gaze. But it was gone almost immediately, replaced by a cold, calculated expression. You don't understand, do you? She said, her voice softer now, almost sad. None of this matters. You're just a pawn in a game much bigger than you. You always have been. Jessica took a step forward, determined not to back down. I'm done being anyone's pawn. For a moment, the two women stood there, locked in a tense standoff. The weight of everything that had happened, everything that was at stake, hung heavy in the air. Jessica knew that if she didn't act now, it would be over. She had to get the drive and get out before Karen stopped her. Before Jessica could make a move, Karen's voice rang out, cold and mocking. You're too late, Jessica. You really think you can win? There's no coming back from this. A flash of light caught Jessica's eye, and she turned just in time to see a figure step out from the shadows behind Karen. It was Blake. Her heart dropped into her stomach. Blake. He had been behind her all this time. Had he known Karen would show up? Had he been working with her all along? The questions slammed into her, but there was no time to dwell on them now. Blake, Jessica said, her voice shaking, but she held her ground. You've been part of this the whole time? Blake didn't respond immediately. His eyes flickered between her and Karen, and there was something in his gaze that made Jessica's stomach turn. Regret? Or maybe guilt? But there was no time to analyze it. Jessica, he said, his voice low, almost apologetic. I never wanted it to go this far. But you have to understand. This is bigger than you. It's bigger than any of us. If you expose the truth, you'll destroy everything. We're trying to protect something much more important. Jessica's pulse raced, the weight of his words pressing down on her. Protect? You've been lying to me. You've been working with them. Blake lowered his head. I'm sorry, Jessica, but there's no way out of this. In that moment, Jessica understood. She wasn't just fighting Karen. She was fighting Blake too. Everyone she had trusted had betrayed her. And now, she had a choice to make. Risk everything to expose the truth, or walk away and let them win. Without hesitation, Jessica grabbed the hard drive and tucked it into her jacket, her heart pounding in her chest. You can't stop me, she said, her voice firm. Blake stepped forward, but Karen raised a hand, stopping him. Let her go, Karen said, her voice cold. She'll never make it out of here alive. Jessica turned and ran, the sound of their footsteps following her as she dashed toward the exit. This was it, the tipping point. There was no going back. The sound of Jessica's footsteps echoed in the dark, empty streets as she ran, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The cold wind stung her face, but the rush of adrenaline coursing through her veins drowned out the discomfort. She couldn't stop. Not now. Not when she was so close to bringing everything into the light. Behind her, the sound of footsteps grew louder. Karen and Blake were close. They weren't going to let her escape so easily. But Jessica wasn't about to be caught. Not after everything she'd been through. She glanced over her shoulder, heart pounding, and saw the faint outline of Karen's figure closing the gap. Blake wasn't far behind. They were both determined to take the hard drive back, to stop her from exposing the truth. But Jessica couldn't let that happen. She rounded a corner and ducked into an alley, pressing herself against the cold brick wall, trying to catch her breath. The sound of footsteps grew closer, then stopped. They were searching for her. Her mind raced. She couldn't outrun them forever. But maybe she didn't have to. She knew the city. She knew the shortcuts. She had a few tricks up her sleeve. Taking a deep breath, Jessica pushed herself off the wall and started moving again, quieter this time. She kept to the shadows, slipping through narrow passageways and side streets. Her heart still pounded, but now she had a plan. She was close. She had to get to the media contact who had promised to help her. They were the key to making sure this hard drive would see the light of day. The evidence, the documents, the recordings, it was all there. The proof she needed to bring Karen and everyone else involved to justice. But the path was never easy. She heard footsteps again, closer this time. They were on her tail. She couldn't risk being caught now, not with everything on the line. Without thinking, Jessica sprinted across the street, darting between cars, her body screaming for a break. She could hear Karen yelling something in the distance, but she didn't dare stop to listen. She had no time for distractions. As she neared a corner, Jessica skidded to a halt. Ahead of her, she could see the faint outline of her contact, a man named Tyler, standing outside a small cafe. He was looking around, waiting, just a little farther. She took another step, but then, just as she moved into the street, a car screeched to a halt in front of her. Jessica froze, her heart leaping into her throat as the door swung open. "Get in," a voice called out urgently. It was Tyler. Without hesitation, Jessica rushed forward and jumped into the car. The engine roared to life as the car sped off down the road. Behind them, she could hear the screech of tires as Karen and Blake arrived at the corner, but they were too late. Jessica breathed a sigh of relief as the car quickly gained speed. Tyler glanced over at her, his expression grim. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low. Jessica nodded, her pulse still racing. "I will be. We have to get this to the media. Right now." Tyler didn't need any more explanation. He slammed the gas pedal to the floor, the car hurtling through the streets as Jessica clutched the hard drive tightly in her hands. They had to move fast. If Karen and Blake had already figured out where she was going, it wouldn't be long before they were on her again. The drive felt endless, but Jessica kept her eyes forward, focusing on the goal. They couldn't afford to fail. The truth had to come out. As the car neared the media office, Jessica's phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at it, and her stomach sank. It was a message from Blake. "Blake, you can't run forever. This will be over soon. You'll regret this." She felt a chill wash over her as she read the words. It wasn't just a threat. It was a warning. Blake wasn't going to stop until he had the hard drive back. But what did he really expect to happen? Did he think she'd hand it over? Did he think she'd just walk away? Jessica's grip tightened on the phone. No, she couldn't let him intimidate her. She couldn't let them win. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everything. Everything they had stolen. Everything they had tried to hide. Her thoughts were interrupted as the car slid to a stop in front of a nondescript building. Tyler turned to her, his voice urgent. "This is it. I'll take it from here. You've done your part." Jessica hesitated for a moment. This was it. She had come so far, and now she had to trust Tyler to get the information into the right hands. It was out of her control now, but if she didn't do this, it would all have been for nothing. Taking a deep breath, Jessica nodded and handed over the hard drive. "Make sure it gets out there. They can't stop this." Tyler nodded, his face set in determination. "I won't let them." Before Jessica could say another word, Tyler was out of the car and heading into the building. Jessica stayed where she was, her heart in her throat as she watched him disappear inside. She had done it. She had fought for the truth. But now, it was out of her hands. As she sat in the car, waiting, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She glanced around nervously, but the street was empty. Still, she knew that Karen and Blake wouldn't give up easily. They were dangerous, and they would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. But Jessica had one advantage now, the truth. And with that, the game had changed. Jessica sat in her apartment, staring at the screen of her laptop. The world outside seemed to be moving at a normal pace, the sounds of traffic and people going about their business muffled by the thick windows. But inside her apartment, the world had changed. Her phone buzzed again, and she instinctively reached for it, her heart racing in her chest. The message was from an anonymous number, But it didn't take much for Jessica to figure out who it was from. Blake, you think the world is going to thank you for this? You've only made things worse. Don't think this is over. Jessica's fingers trembled as she read the message. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what she had done. She had exposed everything. The hard drive, containing the emails, documents, and recordings, had gone public. The media had picked up on it, and the story was everywhere. The corrupt practices of the company, the cover-ups, the people whose lives had been ruined by greed and power. It was all there, laid bare for the world to see. Jessica had taken down the giants, or so she thought. But the moment the story hit the airwaves, the blowback had been swift and severe. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. It was Tyler. She had expected to hear from him, but she wasn't prepared for the gravity in his voice when she answered. "Jessica," he said, his tone urgent, "you need to be careful. They're coming for you." "Who?" she asked, her voice tight with anxiety. "The company. They've already started moving behind the scenes. People are being silenced, assets are being moved, and I just heard that they've hired a team of private investigators to find you. You're their #1 target now." Jessica's stomach dropped. She had known the stakes were high, but hearing it out loud made it all the more real. She wasn't safe anymore. She never had been. "Blake," she whispered, feeling a cold shiver run down her spine. "He won't stop until he gets that drive back." "I know," Tyler replied, "but you've done the right thing. The truth is out there, and the media is already digging into it. There's no turning back now." Jessica stared at the screen in front of her, her reflection staring back at her like a stranger. She had done it. She had exposed the corruption, but now the storm was hitting harder than she could have ever imagined. The phone call ended, but the sense of dread didn't. She paced the room, trying to collect her thoughts. She was a mother first, a woman second, but now she was a target, and she couldn't afford to let her guard down. Another call came through, this time from her friend Sarah. "Jess," Sarah's voice cracked on the other end. "I just saw the news. What the hell is going on?" I had no choice," Jessica said, her voice faltering. "They had to know. People had to know what's been happening." "I get that," Sarah said, her voice soft but worried. "But now you're in danger. The company, Jessica, they're going to do everything they can to bury this. They'll stop at nothing." "I know," Jessica whispered, "but I can't go back. The truth has to come out." For a long moment, there was silence on the line. Jessica could hear Sarah's breathing, slow and steady, as if she were trying to think of the right words. Finally, she spoke. "You have to get out of there, Jess. You're not safe. They're going to come after you, and you don't have anyone left to trust. Not even Blake. He's dangerous." Jessica bit her lip, her thoughts swirling. Sarah was right. She couldn't trust anyone anymore. Not after everything that had happened. "I'll figure it out," Jessica said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "I'm not backing down, but I need to make sure my daughter is safe first." She ended the call, her thoughts racing. Her daughter. She hadn't even told her about the dangers yet. She couldn't let her know what was happening. It was too dangerous. But Jessica knew that every second counted now. Suddenly, there was a knock at her door. It was a soft, hesitant sound, but it sent a jolt of fear through her. She wasn't expecting anyone. Taking a deep breath, she crept toward the door and peeked through the peephole. There was no one there. But when she looked down, her heart skipped a beat. A small, unmarked envelope was slipped under the door. Jessica bent down and carefully picked it up, her fingers trembling. She opened the envelope with caution, pulling out a single sheet of paper. Her eyes skimmed the words, and her stomach churned. "You can run, but you can't hide. You've made a dangerous enemy, Jessica. We will find you. We always do." The message was short, but it was clear. They were on to her. Whoever they weren't giving up. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden sound of her phone buzzing again. Another anonymous message. "Blake, this is far from over. You've made your bed, now lie in it." The cold reality of her situation hit Jessica like a ton of bricks. She had done what she believed was right, but the consequences were more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. She needed to leave. Now. With no time to waste, Jessica packed a small bag, grabbed her daughter's favorite blanket, and called Sarah back. "I'm leaving," she said, her voice low. "I have to get out of here before they find me." "Jess, don't," Sarah begged. "Stay with me. Stay safe. We'll figure something out." "I can't risk it," Jessica replied, her voice firm. "They're already coming for me." As she hung up the phone, she glanced around her apartment one last time. The place that had been her sanctuary was no longer safe. She couldn't stay here. Not anymore. With her heart pounding in her chest, she made her way to the door, ready to disappear into the night. The fallout had begun. The world had become a blur of shadows and uncertainty. Jessica's heart raced as she walked down the deserted alley, her eyes darting over her shoulder. The air felt thick, pressing down on her chest. She couldn't let her guard down. Not now, not ever again. Her life had been torn apart in a matter of days. One minute, she was just a mother, struggling to balance work and family. The next, she was a fugitive, running from people who would do anything to silence her. She had exposed a truth that was too dangerous for those in power to allow. And now, she had to disappear. It wasn't just her life that was at risk. Her daughter's safety weighed heavily on her mind. She couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Jessica had made a promise to herself. The truth would come out, but she would do whatever it took to protect her family from the storm she had unleashed. As she reached the small, run-down apartment where she had been hiding out for the past few days, her phone buzzed. The name on the screen made her stomach drop. She answered quickly, her voice low. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "I just heard something," Sarah said, her voice tight with worry. "You're not safe. They're looking for you. They're questioning everyone. People you know. They've even started asking about me." "Jessica, they won't stop until they find you." Jessica's heart skipped a beat. "Have you seen anything suspicious?" "No," Sarah replied, "but I'm getting out of town for a while. I don't trust anyone anymore." "You should too." "I don't know where to go," Jessica said, her voice cracking. "I can't keep running forever." "You have to," Sarah insisted. "You don't have a choice. The people after you are dangerous. They'll stop at nothing." The call ended abruptly, and Jessica stood there, staring at her phone. She had no idea where to turn next. The walls were closing in around her. It felt like the whole city was searching for her, and she didn't know how much longer she could stay hidden. She glanced down at the envelope she had received earlier, the one with the cryptic warning. It was a reminder of the stakes. There was no going back. The path she had chosen was one of no return. But she couldn't stop now, not when she was so close. Suddenly, a voice broke through her thoughts. "Jessica?" She froze. The voice sounded familiar. She turned around slowly, heart hammering in her chest. Standing in the doorway of the alley was a figure she hadn't seen in years. It was Jake, her former friend, and someone she had once trusted with her life. "What are you doing here?" Jessica asked, trying to hide the shock in her voice. "How did you find me?" Jake stepped closer, his expression serious. "I've been tracking you. I saw the news, and I knew you were in trouble. They're coming for you, Jess, and you can't hide forever." Jessica felt a mix of relief and wariness flood through her. Jake had always been resourceful, but it had been years since they'd spoken. "Why should I trust you? After all this time?" Jake hesitated, then spoke with quiet urgency. "Because I'm the only one who can help you now. You're in too deep. They won't stop until you're either dead or silenced." Jessica narrowed her eyes. "Who are they, Jake? Who are we really up against?" Jake hesitated, glancing around nervously. "Not here. Not now. But I know what's going on. You've exposed more than you realize. This isn't just about the company. It's bigger. There are people at the top, people with power, who will do anything to keep their secrets hidden." Jessica felt her stomach drop. This wasn't just a corporate cover-up. This was a conspiracy of a magnitude she hadn't even begun to understand. "Come with me," Jake urged. "We have to leave the city. I have a place where we can lay low, but we don't have much time." Jessica hesitated. She had no choice. The streets weren't safe, and she couldn't trust anyone else. Not even Sarah could help her now, not with the threats closing in. "I don't know where to go, Jake," she said, her voice filled with doubt. I'm not sure I can trust anyone anymore. Jake nodded. I get it. But if we stay here, they'll find us. We need to get out. Trust me, Jess. For a moment, Jessica stood there, torn. But deep down, she knew Jake was right. She couldn't keep running in circles, waiting for something to change. She had to take control of her future, no matter how uncertain it seemed. I'll go, she said finally, her voice firm. But this better not be some kind of trap, Jake. It's not, he assured her. But you need to stay sharp. I've got your back. You just need to trust me. With that, Jessica turned and followed Jake down the alley, the city lights fading behind her. The weight of the world pressed down on her shoulders, but for the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't alone. As they walked, Jake filled her in on what he knew. The conspiracy was bigger than just a few bad apples at the company. The people involved were powerful, connected to networks that spanned far beyond what Jessica had ever imagined. The hard drive she had exposed contained not only evidence of corruption but information that could destroy people in high places, people who would do anything to keep it buried. Jessica's mind raced as she processed everything. How had it all gotten so out of hand? How had she unknowingly walked into a web of lies and deceit that spanned decades? The more Jake spoke, the more Jessica realized how much danger she was in. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about uncovering the truth, no matter the cost. When they reached the safe house, a small, secluded cabin in the woods, Jessica knew they couldn't stay there long. The clock was ticking, and the people chasing her wouldn't rest until they had her in their grasp. But for now, the chase had slowed. For now, she had a brief moment of peace. And that was all she needed to plan her next move. The cabin was quiet. Too quiet. Jessica sat at the small wooden table, her fingers hovering over the laptop in front of her. The glow of the screen illuminated her face in the otherwise dim room, casting eerie shadows that only heightened the sense of unease she felt. Jake was across from her, fiddling with his phone, his eyes flickering nervously toward the window every so often. The trees outside were dense, their branches casting long, twisted shapes across the forest floor, but there was no guarantee that they were safe here. The people who were after them weren't just skilled. They were connected, pulling strings in ways that Jessica had yet to fully comprehend. Jessica let out a deep breath and typed in a series of encrypted commands. The computer screen flickered momentarily, a sign that Jake's precautions were working, at least for now. "You sure this is going to work?" she asked, her voice tense. Jake leaned back in his chair, his eyes hard with determination. "I don't know, but it's our best shot. The truth is out there, but it's buried deep in the digital underworld, the dark web." The words sent a chill down Jessica's spine. She had heard of it, of course. The hidden corners of the internet, where illegal activities, shady transactions, and classified information were exchanged. But she never imagined that she would have to delve into it herself. Jake, who had once worked in cybersecurity, seemed to know exactly where to look. The information they needed was encrypted, buried beneath layers of firewalls and secure networks, but it was there, somewhere. "I can't believe it's come to this," Jessica muttered. "We're going to have to trust the very system that got us into this mess?" "Sometimes the only way to fight fire is with fire," Jake replied, his voice calm but edged with urgency. "We need to understand what we're up against. If we don't, they'll keep hunting us down, and the truth will stay hidden forever." Jessica closed her eyes for a moment, taking in his words. It wasn't just about survival anymore. This was bigger than her, bigger than anything she had ever dreamed. The conspiracy she had exposed wasn't just a few corrupt executives or shady business practices. It was an intricate web, stretching across industries, governments, and powerful private entities. As the minutes ticked by, the computer screen finally displayed a message. The message was brief, but it was a lifeline. Jessica and Jake exchanged a look, both of them feeling the weight of what they were about to uncover. Jake sat up straighter. "We're in. Now we just need to follow the trail." Jessica leaned forward, watching as Jake navigated through the encrypted files. For the next hour, they scrolled through what appeared to be millions of records, documents, transactions, names, each one more damning than the last. The deeper they dug, the more they realized the sheer scale of the operation. There were references to offshore accounts, shell companies, and people in positions of immense power. People who controlled more than just the company Jessica had once worked for. This goes way beyond the corporate world, Jessica said quietly, her voice trembling. There's government involvement. And private security firms. This is how they've been covering it all up. Jake nodded, his face grim. And it's how they've been silencing anyone who tries to expose them. They've been manipulating media, pulling strings in politics. It's bigger than we ever imagined. Jessica's mind raced as the implications of their findings sank in. This wasn't just about exposing a few corrupt executives. It was about toppling a network of power that spanned far beyond anything she could have ever dreamed. And the more she saw, the more she realized that the people behind this would do anything to keep their secrets safe. There was one file in particular that caught Jessica's eye. It was marked with a red warning, urgent, do not release. Her heart skipped a beat as she clicked on it. As the document opened, Jessica's breath caught in her throat. The file contained detailed information about the company's involvement in illegal arms deals, money laundering, and even black market organ trafficking. It was the kind of thing you saw in movies, not something that happened in the real world. She felt her stomach turn. If this information got out, if the media got their hands on this, it would cause an international scandal. It could bring down governments, destroy powerful families. But it was the truth, the ugly, unvarnished truth that they had been hiding for years. This is it, Jessica whispered. This is the nail in the coffin. This is everything. Jake's eyes darkened. But it's also our death sentence if we're not careful. This is why they've been hunting us. This is why they'll stop at nothing to shut us up. Jessica knew he was right. The moment they exposed this, they would become targets of the highest order. No one would stop them from protecting their secrets. But as she stared at the document, she felt something else, a surge of resolve. She had come this far. She couldn't back down now. The world needed to know. The truth needed to come out, no matter the cost. Suddenly, a sharp sound broke the silence, the distant thud of a door slamming. Both Jessica and Jake froze, their hearts skipping a beat. What was that? Jessica whispered. Jake was already on his feet, his hand gripping the edge of the table. They found us. Jessica's blood ran cold. They had no time to lose. The people behind this conspiracy weren't just going to sit back and let them expose everything. They had to move, and fast. Jake grabbed the laptop and shoved it into his bag. Get your stuff. We need to leave now. Panic gripped Jessica's chest as she scrambled to gather her things. The walls were closing in on them, and she knew they didn't have much time. They had uncovered the truth, but the truth was a dangerous weapon. And now, it was time to use it. The air in the cabin was thick with tension as Jessica and Jake packed their bags in a hurried frenzy. Every sound outside, the rustling of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, felt amplified in the silence. They couldn't afford to be caught off guard. Not now. Jessica's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't believe it had come to this. One moment, they were sifting through encrypted files on the dark web, uncovering the darkest corners of corporate corruption and international crime. The next, they were scrambling to escape a threat that seemed to grow by the minute. Do you think they've already traced us? Jessica asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake's expression was grim as he zipped up his bag. They'll be here soon. We need to go. Now. Jessica grabbed the last of her things, a few clothes, her phone, and a folder with the crucial evidence they had uncovered. She had to keep her head in the game, focus on the escape. There was no time to second-guess herself now. Jake moved quickly to the window and peeked through the blinds. His eyes scanned the area, alert to every movement. It's too quiet, he muttered. They're either already here, or they're waiting for us to make a mistake. Should we go through the woods? Jessica asked. It was their only chance to disappear, through the dense forest that surrounded the cabin. But it wasn't a perfect plan. The terrain was difficult to navigate, and there was no telling if someone was already watching. Jake hesitated, running his fingers through his hair. We don't have much of a choice. The roads are too risky. If we stay here, they'll catch us. If we go through the woods, we might be able to lose them. Then it's settled, Jessica said, making a firm decision. We go through the woods. All right, Jake replied, his voice low but steady. "Stay close. And whatever you do, don't make a sound." Jessica nodded, her pulse quickening as they gathered their things and moved toward the back door. The cabin creaked with each step they took, and for a moment, she thought she heard footsteps crunching on the gravel outside. "Go," Jake hissed, pushing her gently out the door. He followed quickly behind, shutting it quietly. The moonlight barely pierced the canopy of trees as they sprinted through the woods, their footsteps muffled by the thick layers of leaves. Jessica's breath came in ragged bursts as they ran, fear and adrenaline coursing through her veins. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the bushes made her jump, but she couldn't afford to slow down. After what felt like hours of running, Jake stopped suddenly, holding up a hand to signal for silence. They crouched low to the ground, their breathing the only sound that filled the night air. "I heard something," Jake whispered. "Stay here. I'll check it out." Jessica watched him slip into the shadows, her eyes darting to every corner of the forest. The darkness seemed to swallow them whole. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but she had no choice. She had to trust Jake. Minutes later, Jake reappeared, his face tense but relieved. "It's a car, black SUV, parked about a mile up the road. I don't think they're looking for us yet, but they will be soon." "We need to keep moving," Jessica said urgently. She could feel the walls closing in, the weight of the world pressing down on her. "How far until we reach the safe house?" Jake glanced at his watch. "It'll take us at least 2 more hours to get there. But we need to make sure we're not being followed. I've got a few tricks up my sleeve, but if we don't stay sharp, we're dead." The reality of the situation hit Jessica like a punch to the gut. The clock was ticking. Their every move had to be calculated, every step careful. She wasn't just running for her life. She was running to save her daughter, to expose the truth that could destroy a powerful network of people who would do anything to keep their secrets. "Let's go," she said, determination hardening her voice. "I'm not stopping until we're safe." They continued on, weaving through the trees, barely making a sound. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a small clearing. A tiny stream babbled in the distance, the only sign of life in the otherwise still night. Jake knelt by the water's edge, checking his phone. "We're getting close," he muttered. "Stay low. We don't know who's out there." Suddenly, the sound of a twig snapping behind them sent a chill down Jessica's spine. She turned around, her heart in her throat. A shadow moved across the clearing, fast and deliberate. "Jake," Jessica whispered, her voice trembling. "We're not alone." Before Jake could respond, there was a flash of movement, and the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked echoed through the air. "Don't move," a voice called out from the darkness. It was low, steady, like someone who had done this 1,000 times before. "You're not getting away." Jessica's stomach twisted with fear, but she kept her face calm. If she panicked now, they were as good as dead. She knew Jake had a plan. He always did. But time was running out. The voice came closer, the figure finally stepping into the moonlight. It was a man, tall, with a dark jacket and a cold expression. "You don't know who you're dealing with," the man said, aiming the gun directly at them. "I don't want to hurt you, but you're in over your head." Jessica's mind raced. This was it, the moment they had been running from. But just as she opened her mouth to respond, Jake lunged forward, grabbing a rock from the ground and throwing it with precision. The impact sent the man stumbling backward, momentarily disoriented. It was enough. "Run," Jake shouted. Without thinking, Jessica bolted, sprinting through the trees, her legs pumping with fear-fueled energy. Behind her, she heard the sound of footsteps, then a gunshot that pierced the night. She didn't look back. The dark woods seemed to close in around them as Jessica and Jake ran, breathless and panicked. They'd managed to evade their pursuers so far, but every second felt like a countdown to disaster. The forest, once a refuge, now felt like a prison. They had no clear escape route, no solid plan beyond just running, and the only thing that kept them going was the hope that the safe house wasn't too far off. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged from the trees and found themselves in a narrow dirt road. The familiar outlines of a small, unmarked building loomed in the distance. It was their destination. But something felt wrong. Jessica paused, her senses on high alert. The safe house was supposed to be hidden, untouched by anyone who might be connected to the conspiracy. But as she scanned the area, she noticed something she hadn't expected. A black SUV parked just a few feet from the door. "They found us," Jake muttered, his eyes narrowing. "No, not possible. The safe house is supposed to be secure," Jessica said, her voice shaking with doubt. "Are you sure this is the right place?" Jake nodded, but the unease in his eyes mirrored Jessica's. "We don't have a choice now. We can't afford to go back into the woods." They approached cautiously, staying low, but as they neared the door, it opened abruptly. "Move quickly," a voice hissed from inside. It was a woman's voice, urgent, low, and oddly familiar. Jessica's heart skipped a beat. She knew that voice. She had heard it only a few days ago, on the phone, when she first started to unravel the conspiracy. "Riley?" Jessica whispered. Riley, the hacker who had initially helped them with the encrypted files, stepped into view, her face tense but determined. She looked over her shoulder nervously before pulling them inside. "What's going on?" Jessica demanded, her mind racing. "How did you find us?" "I didn't find you," Riley said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been watching from afar, trying to stay under the radar. But I found something big, and I think you need to hear it." Jake exchanged a wary glance with Jessica. He wasn't sure if he trusted Riley entirely. The hacker had been a valuable ally, but the closer they got to the truth, the more dangerous everything became. And in this world, trust was a luxury they couldn't afford. Jessica stepped forward, her voice firm. "What did you find?" Riley led them down a narrow hallway, away from the main room, to a small office tucked in the back of the building. As they entered, Riley flipped open a laptop and began typing rapidly. The screen came to life, showing a series of encrypted documents, much like the ones Jessica had seen in the dark web files. "This," Riley said, pointing to the screen, "is the final piece of the puzzle. It's everything you've been looking for." Jessica leaned in, her eyes scanning the documents. They detailed the involvement of several key players in the conspiracy, people they had only heard of in passing, but now, their names were connected to the most dangerous operations they had uncovered. Arms deals, black market trafficking, and secret government ties were only the tip of the iceberg. "Who's behind all of this?" Jessica asked, her voice growing colder as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Riley hesitated. "I don't know, but I think I know who can help us. The problem is we can't trust anyone anymore. Not even me." The words hit Jessica like a slap to the face. She stared at Riley, disbelief flashing across her features. "What do you mean? Not even you?" Riley's eyes flickered, and for a brief moment, Jessica saw a flicker of something in her expression, a coldness, a shift in demeanor that she couldn't quite place. Riley was hiding something. "I'm not who you think I am," Riley said slowly, her voice low and controlled. "I was hired to keep an eye on you, to see what you found. You were never supposed to get this far." Jessica's blood ran cold. "You've been working for them?" Riley nodded, her face darkening. "Yes, but I didn't expect you to get this close. And I didn't think you'd make it this far either. I tried to walk away, but now they're forcing my hand. You've uncovered something they can't allow to see the light of day." Jake took a step back, his jaw tightening. "How do we know this isn't a trick? How do we know you're not setting us up?" Riley stood still for a moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she exhaled, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of her confession had become too much to bear. "Because I'm the one who found out that they were planning to use you," she said quietly. "You, Jessica, were never meant to survive this long. They were going to frame you for everything. And now, they're after me too." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Betrayal, deceit, and lies had been swirling around them from the very beginning. But the truth was even darker than Jessica had imagined. Riley hadn't just been an ally. She had been a spy, placed there to monitor them, to make sure they didn't get too close to the truth. But there was one thing Riley hadn't counted on. Jessica wasn't backing down. "Not now, not ever." "We don't trust you," Jessica said, her voice icy. "But we're going to need your help. If you really want out of this, You can start by telling us everything. Right now. Riley didn't say a word. Instead, she turned to the laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard once again. She opened a new document, and the information that appeared on the screen was worse than anything Jessica had imagined. "We have one shot at this," Riley said, her voice steady now. "But you need to know, if you go after them, they will come after you. They won't stop. They won't rest until you're gone. And if you want to survive, you'll have to make some hard choices." Jessica looked at Jake, the weight of their situation settling heavily on her shoulders. The conspiracy was no longer just a fight for justice, it was a fight for survival. The question now was simple. Who could they trust, and who would betray them next? The dawn was breaking, casting a pale orange glow over the distant hills. Jessica stood at the edge of the safe house's window, staring out at the horizon. Her mind was racing, thoughts colliding in a chaotic frenzy. This was it, the final confrontation. Everything had led to this moment. She couldn't help but wonder how much longer she could run, how much longer she could keep playing this deadly game of cat and mouse. The evidence they had uncovered was enough to bring down a network of powerful figures who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. And now, with the conspiracy exposed, they were coming for her. Coming for Jake. Coming for everything she held dear. "Are you ready?" Jake's voice broke through her thoughts, calm but filled with determination. She turned to face him, taking in his rugged expression, the weight of the world in his eyes. They had been through so much together. Betrayals, close calls, moments of doubt, but somehow they were still standing. "As ready as I'll ever be," Jessica replied, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. They had planned this for days. Every detail had been meticulously worked out, but in this line of work, plans could change in an instant. They had to be ready for anything. Riley had given them the last pieces of information they needed: names, locations, and a secure way to reach the heart of the operation. But that wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part would be getting inside, staying alive, and exposing the truth before it was too late. "We make it to the data center," Jake said, looking at the map on the wall. "We upload the files, and we walk out. Simple as that." Jessica frowned. Simple? It never is. They'll be waiting for us. Jake shrugged, a wry smile on his face. "Then we make sure they don't get the chance." But Jessica knew that the odds were stacked against them. This was no longer about finding evidence. It was about survival. And even if they succeeded, the world would never be the same. "Let's go," she said, taking a deep breath. "It's now or never." They left the safe house, their footsteps silent on the gravel road as they made their way to the waiting car. The air was thick with tension, but there was no turning back. Not after everything they had fought for. Not after everything they had lost. The drive to the data center was long, but it felt like it passed in a blur. Every mile, every turn felt like a step closer to the inevitable confrontation. Jessica's mind raced, recalling everything they had learned, everything they had sacrificed to get to this point. And yet, even now, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that there was one more twist waiting for them. Jake pulled into the parking garage with a screech of tires, and they both immediately got out of the car, moving quickly, eyes darting around. Jessica's senses were on high alert. She could feel the weight of the moment, like they were walking into the lion's den. They entered the building through a back entrance, slipping through the security doors with ease, thanks to the access codes Riley had provided. But as they moved down the narrow hall toward the main server room, Jessica's heart skipped a beat. There, standing in their path, was someone she hadn't expected to see again. Riley. But this time, her expression was different. Cold. Calculating. And in her hand was a gun. "Did you really think you could pull this off?" Riley's voice was as smooth as ever, but there was an edge to it now. "You're in way over your heads." Jessica froze. "Riley, what the hell?" "I told you," Riley said with a sad smile. "I was never on your side. You were just a pawn in a much bigger game. And now, you've exposed everything. You're a threat to people who don't take kindly to threats." Jake's jaw tightened. "You betrayed us. After everything we did for you." Riley's eyes flickered, a flash of regret passing through her expression, but it was gone in an instant. "I don't have time for regrets. You're too dangerous now. All of this, she gestured to the hallway, was never supposed to happen. Jessica took a step forward, her voice firm. We're not backing down. Not now. Riley shook her head. You don't have a choice. Suddenly, the air was thick with tension. Riley raised the gun, and Jessica's body went into survival mode, her mind calculating every possible escape. But before anything could happen, a loud crash echoed through the hall. The sound of multiple gunshots rang out, followed by the clatter of footsteps running toward them. Move, Jake shouted, grabbing Jessica's arm and pulling her toward a nearby door. The chaos erupted around them as security personnel flooded the hall. In the confusion, Riley hesitated, her gun still aimed at Jessica, but her attention divided. That was all the opening they needed. Jessica and Jake bolted into the room, slamming the door behind them. Inside, rows upon rows of servers hummed quietly. They rushed toward the terminal, fingers flying over the keyboard. The data they needed to expose the conspiracy, everything, was just a few keystrokes away. But time was running out. Do it, Jessica urged, panic rising in her chest. Jake didn't hesitate. He hit the final key, and the files began to upload. Outside, the sounds of gunfire echoed in the distance, growing louder. The walls of the room seemed to close in on them, and Jessica could feel the heat of fear rising in her throat. Come on, Jake shouted as the last file transferred. We're out of time. The door slammed open, and Riley appeared, flanked by 2 armed guards. Her face was cold, resolute. You won't get away with this, Riley spat. But just as she raised her gun, a sharp burst of noise interrupted everything. The sound of sirens, the distinct wail of approaching law enforcement. And then, chaos erupted in the hallway. Riley hesitated for just a moment, long enough for Jessica and Jake to make a break for it. Go, Jessica shouted, pulling Jake toward the exit. They ran, heart pounding in their chests, as the building around them descended into chaos. They made it out into the daylight, their breaths heavy, but there was no time to look back. Behind them, the conspiracy had been exposed. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Jessica could see a sliver of hope.